welcome to today's online event. I'm Mel Warnes and I'm the Secretary for the Detective Forum for the Police Federation, and my day job is on the National Board for the Police Federation, and I'm currently covering some work in the Secretary's office, so I'm acting National Deputy Secretary, which is the longest title that we have here. I'm going to go over the agenda in a moment, but I'll just introduce you to Ben first.
Good morning, Federation. My name is Ben Hudson. I am honoured to be the chair of the Detective Forum. My day job is the branch secretary for Suffolk in the east of England. And we're really grateful for you all taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this morning and for the rest of the day. And what we hope will be a very interesting and varied set of presentations for you. Mel and I are just going to give you a bit of an update on the work that we do on behalf of you all from a federation perspective, and talk about a couple of issues that are affecting us all nationally. Mel.
Thank you. So as you can see, the agenda on the screen at the moment. We hope you do enjoy today and the variety that we've arranged for you. So Ben and I are going to go through a few bits and pieces, and we've got some exciting news for this first half an hour to go over with you before Kath joins us from the illegal money lending team talking about loan sharks. Now, I saw Kath speak with a colleague of hers a few months ago at a credit union conference, and I thought her presentation was really good, and immediately thought that of this forum and this event. So I'm really pleased that Kath can join us today and go through that presentation. We'll then be moving on to Adrian James, who will talk about demands on modern detectives. Some of you may have heard Adrian speak in the past around the work and research he does on detective demand and workloads, etc. So I hope you'll find that really interesting. We'll have a short lunch break at 12:15 for half an hour, and then we'll have Sarah Jane Bray, who's the staff officer to the MPCC lead for retention, recruitment and wellbeing of investigators portfolio, and she'll be joined by ACC Martin Brunning, who's now the ACC in Cambridgeshire, but he has led for some time now on detective wellbeing. So it'd be great to hear from them about the national work that's being done around investigator wellbeing and demand. That will link in and follow on from Adrian's input. And then finally this afternoon we will have Rob Jones joining us from the NCA, and he'll be going through an Operation Destabilise, which will be a closed session. And I'll remind you all just before that as well that no screenshots, etc., to be taken. Although this is being recorded today, when this is shared after the event, it won't include Rob's presentation. So please be respectful of that, and no screenshots or recording separate of Rob's presentation. And then we'll just go over a quick summary to close off this afternoon. So hope that you really enjoy today, and we'll just carry on talking about the forum, the work we're doing, and a few other little bits for now.
So the Police Federation Detectives Forum has been running for many years now, and we have representatives from every single one of your branches that sit on the forum. We meet quarterly. And we also try and put on as many of our webinars as we can, which hopefully some of you have already seen, to try and keep you as detectives and investigators informed, for your voice to be heard, for the concerns and the problems that you encounter with your day-to-day work, with policy, with legislation, to be highlighted to key stakeholders and those who can influence and make decisions. We always try and visit forces when we go. Mel and I will hold meetings around the country. We're off to Devon and Cornwall in July, and then on to Birmingham in November. So if you are keen to have us visit, show us around your stations and let us understand the concerns and issues that, and certainly the good work and the good examples of things that are working in your forces. Do contact your local branch. Do speak to your detective lead, and we're happy to come along and meet you and find out more about what you do. The piece of work that I've been leading on nationally on behalf of you all is redaction and, more importantly, simplify the DG6. This bit of work has been a passion of mine but for the last couple of years now, and I think it's probably worth just giving you all a little bit of an update today, because it is something that affects you all on a daily basis. We know redaction is an issue. It is an extremely burdensome and potentially unnecessary exercise, certainly on those cases where you have to refer to the CPS, but you know you're probably not going to get a charge. If you look at what, in terms of wastage, even in the policing productivity review that was done in October 23, it highlighted that we were wasting around 770,000 hours. I think that's an exceptionally conservative estimate. But if you equate that to a middle band police officer, we're talking £18 million wasted. Now, if that was happening in any other area of policing, you can be absolutely assured that the Home Secretary, the Police Minister, and every other MP would be banging on to Chief Constables demanding that we should stop wasting money. Yet, sadly, they seem to be very happy for you to waste all that money in your time, because it comes down to the CPS not willing to move on their guidance. As your federation, I've tried to solve that problem by looking at the root cause. The root cause of the reasons why you have to redact is the Data Protection Act, and we had some excellent legal advice to get an amendment to the Data Access and Use Bill that is currently going through Parliament. We put that forward. I was very, very lucky that we had Baroness Morgan and Lord Thomas who sponsored it within the Lords, where the bill has started, and that was debated just before Christmas this year. Sadly, throughout this period, the government, the Home Office, wouldn't get behind it. They don't feel that legislative change is necessary. There hasn't been any much engagement on their reasons why, but we have persisted. But sadly, the bill has moved through all stages of the Houses, and it's now in its final stage back in the House of Lords, and we couldn't get any MPs to support it or table an amendment within the Commons, which is very sad. But if there's no further legislative path that I can move with this, I will re-engage with the MPCC. Mr. De Mayor in Surrey is extremely supportive of trying to make this extremely burdensome problem reduced for you all. I'll re-engage with the Attorney General's office. I'll re-engage with the Director of Public Prosecutions and also the ICO, and work collectively on your behalf to try and find some ways through it. Now, I know that the government are looking and relying on AI-enabled automation, which will reduce some of the burden, but it isn't perfect, because, as we all know, you have to identify what to tell the computer to redact before it can do it. So you have to review the material to ensure it's right. They want to explore options to improving the processes of redaction between the police and CPS. And as your detective chair, I will be leading on that for the Federation to try and get that as smooth as possible for you, and streamlining disclosure. And I think that is the case that we've always pushed for, is the disclosure process needs to be easier for you all, and the wastage in the system needs to come out. So that's a snapshot of where we are with that. The work continues, and you'll all be kept updated through your branches and through the national bulletins I do in respect of how that moves through in for the rest of this year. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ben. What I should have said to start with was, if you've got any questions or comments, use the chat bar if you're able to. Now, appreciate, I think some of you may be joining on your full systems, which may not have access to the chat bar. So if not, if you're able to email any questions to events@polfed.org, you'll see there on the screen, events@polfed.org, or you can scan the QR code that will leave there for you for a moment or so. And when our speakers are presenting later, we've all agreed that we'll let them present, and there'll be time at the end of each presentation for questions. Ben and I will facilitate those, so if you want to put the questions in advance as the presentation goes on, please do, and we'll take note of them. And any that you email through to events or via the QR code, our events team will pop them in the chat for us as well. So we'll do questions after each of the presentation. I must also say that we're able to do this event today because it's sponsored by Quick Mortgages, and we really do appreciate their support and sponsorship of all of our events and webinars this year. So there is a slide on Quick Mortgages that we can share later on as well with you, but if you can bear them in mind. I will just go back over a little bit about the forum, as Ben was talking about earlier. We've just gone through, or still going through, an election process at the moment within the Federation. So it may be that you're a new rep and are a detective and you're keen to be involved in the forum, so do let your branch secretary know. I'll be going out to them shortly once I've got a full up-to-date list of the new secretaries, or a current list of the secretaries for the Federation. So if you're interested in remaining on the forum, that would be great. Please let them know, or if you want to join, please do. And for those of you that maybe aren't Fed reps that are on the event today, if you've got any issues that you want to raise or good work you think is going on in your force that you want to be shared amongst other detectives across England and Wales, please link in with your branch or come direct to Ben and myself, and we can talk to you about that. So we often, at our event at this time of year, do go over the pay and morale survey that a lot of you did complete last year for us. We haven't quite got the full up-to-date results that have been taken out of everything for detectives. So I'll be going over that, those results in our July meeting on the 15th of July. So if you're able to join, and after today's event, I will recirculate the dates and the link for the Teams meeting in July. If you're able to join that would be great. It's only a couple of hours in the afternoon, so hopefully you'll find that useful to go through all the pay and morale bits with us. We've currently got a Copt Enough campaign ongoing at the moment. I'm hoping that you would have all seen this, and it's been circulated. It's been on our socials, etc. And it's the message behind it is a double message around what the police take home is criminal. We know from a pay perspective, frontline officers on average 21% below where we should be in a real terms pay cut, but also it's more than just the pay that the police officers take home. It's that mental side of things, injuries, physical injury, etc. So we know there are rising assaults, the daily trauma and risk that you all take home doing your job day to day. And we're saying within this campaign that enough is enough. So it started about a month ago on the 1st of May. Within the first day, we had 2,000 registrations on our virtual picket line, and we're now up to about 17,000. And I would urge you all to share the link with regards to this campaign and the virtual picket line with your friends and family. It's not just about police officers registering on there. It can be anybody that supports us and you as police officers and the day-to-day struggles that we have doing a job for that real terms pay cut and the risk that you all take day in, day out. So We know that a third of officers struggle to afford food, rent, or heating. And how can that be right? You know, as a police officer, not having enough money month to month, struggling to afford the absolute basics. And so, you know, there's a lot of work within where I work in the Secretary's office that we're doing with regards to pay and the pay submission from this year. And we're waiting for the pay review body and their submission and going via government. And what that will actually look like, we'll probably find out, in fact, next month now. So, you know, we've heard and seen what other public sectors and, for example, prison officers have been offered around. Prison officers have been given or been offered a 4% pay award, and others are around that mark as well. Of course, we don't have that right to strike. We know the junior doctors are already talking about striking, and they had what we would have considered an amazing pay deal with that 20-something% last year. So, you know, we haven't got that to fall back on, but there's lots of other work that we're doing in the background with regards to, you know, doing the best we can with regards to evidencing what we should get paid. There's all about retention. If chiefs actually treated their officers better, retained more officers, we are absolutely hemorrhaging officers, can't say it, you know, week in, week out. The amount of officers that are leaving it's not enough just to stay now and think about either what the pension is or sort of long-term prospects in this job. We know you can get another job for a similar wage and not have that risk, not come into work and be disrespected by the public, be assaulted, you know, having no respect from the government, etc. And you can go and get a job of a similar wage elsewhere. We also know from a mental health perspective, those numbers within officers suffering are absolutely soaring. So the more support you can get through friends and family on that virtual picket line just shows the public support for police officers. Be really grateful for your assistance on that.
And that's why it is important. It isn't just about what Mel said. And this is the message that, you know, this is a joined up campaign that we're looking to run for the next few years. And it's about getting the public on board. We know that police officers are on board because everyone feels it in their pocket, but 10,000 officers could be lost this year. £9.9 billion could be wasted trying to maintain police numbers. You'll all know in your forces that the revolving door of recruitment, where people join and don't stay for 3 years, let alone 30. And communities will ultimately, your communities where you live will be less safe because police officers will be less experienced. And actually what we need to do is it's about looking at the four pillars: fair pay, support the frontline risk, including bringing in the P factor that Windsor talked about us. We are unique as a public sector workers, and therefore the risks and the fact that you can't strike should be an additional on your pay. Retention, not just recruitment. Invest in people so they stay, and then better protection for your mental health and proper support that sits in line with the police covenant, where it's mandatory that you will be looked after, the resources will be available to you, so that you, and trauma tracking and proper risk assessments put in place so that your welfare is managed throughout your career, not just if sadly the worst happens and you do break. So this is something we all must come together on this, because we must stand united and must get our friends and families. So please, any support you can give on will be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So just moving on, before we bring in our first speaker in about 10 minutes, we've got some great news, and I'm going to hand over to Ben now to launch our Detective Awards.
So traditionally we have had the National Detective Awards. We haven't been able to have them for a couple of years, and I am delighted today to open the 2025 Federation National Detective Forum Awards. We aim to recognise the work that's being done throughout the country and show appreciation to detectives working on often very complex cases. We would appreciate your support in sharing this, and we hope that we'll get submissions from every force across the country. And the winners of these will be presented during the annual PFEW conference in November in Birmingham. So we've got the two awards this year. We've got Detective Investigation of the Year, the criteria of which is to be awarded to an individual or team or of detective officers that, in the judgment of the PFNDF, have demonstrated an outstanding ability in the field of detective work within a particular complex investigation, whilst having displayed the highest standard of detective officer skill and abilities. This is always a very highly contended section, and it's always a pleasure to read and review as part of the judging panel, the phenomenal work that goes on across the country. It is weighted in respect of, because we are very aware that quite often some of the most complex jobs are done by an individual officer, maybe a couple of individual officers with the support of a DS. And actually, it's not always a whole major incident team with all the resources and Holmes abilities that are there to run these complex cases. So it is weighted in respect of, if there are few individuals doing it, that it's slightly weighted heavier than it would be if it was a team. So please do think about any jobs you and your colleagues have had. They do need to be finished through the court process, because just for issues of sub judice and disclosure, but please put it forward. The other award is the National Detective of the Year. We're looking for a federated rank individual, that's DC to DCI, who has gone above and beyond their core role as an investigator, whether that's in relation to victim care, supporting colleagues, or similar, to which have had a profound positive impact on others, with the evidence of constant commitment to outstanding service. The last winner of this was phenomenal. The work that the officer had done to promote the work of detectives, the well-being around it, and to the support she offered to her colleagues and those wanting to come into investigative work was literally outstanding. So again, it's normally a really hotly contested area, and if you've got someone you're thinking of that you think can match that criteria, please do nominate them. So they're the two awards this year, and Mel will go through the timeline.
Lovely, thank you. So we're opening that today, and we'll get that sent out. All of the details will be posted on the Chief's Net for the Chief Constables, for the Chief Officer teams, and we will also circulate that via the forum for you to send out to your forces. We think, you'll be the ones that know the heads of department, heads of crime, etc. But we will say that it has to be a DI and above that nominates. And we think, therefore, it's not going to be too high to sit in somebody's inbox or be forgotten about, and not too low that people are just nominating friends, etc. But so it opens today. We'll get everything circulated. You've got a couple of months to get nominations in. We'll be closing nominations on the 3rd of August, and that will give us a chance as a team to get a panel together to look through all of the nominations. We normally have in excess of 100 covering both awards, for us to go through and choose worthy winners. We will then announce the winners around the end of September, and as Ben said, we'll be looking at giving out the awards at our conference, our annual conference, 18th, 19th of November in Birmingham. If our nominees aren't able to make that, we'll make other arrangements. We'll make them feel special in some way to give them their awards. So we really look forward to to receiving any nominations and having in excess of 100 hopefully to go through and work through during sort of August and September. We've always historically these have been popular awards, and we want to make sure that we do recognise the amount of work that you all do and the good work that's out there. So any cases that have concluded since September 23 to date is what we're looking for, because that's the last time we concluded our last awards in 23. So yeah, we look forward to receiving them, and hopefully you'll put the effort in for us as well in getting those nominations in, and we'll get them circulated a bit later today to you all. So let's move on to the agenda. I can see that Kath has joined us a few minutes early. As I mentioned earlier, Kath's going to talk to us about loan sharks. I'll let her do the introduction. But if you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat bar, and Ben and I will sort them out and come to them at the end of Kath's presentation. And I hope you find it as interesting as I did a couple of months ago. So over to you, Kath. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here. My name's Kath Wohlers. I am one of the operations managers, excuse me, with the England illegal money lending team. So what is a loan shark? Legally speaking, it's a criminal offence to lend money without authorisation. So the actual offence of illegal money lending is about unauthorised money lending. This is a criminal offence, not a civil offence, and it's about getting this authorisation from the Financial Conduct Authority. The maximum penalty is a 2-year prison sentence and/or a fine of up to £5,000, but that's for every count of illegal lending, so that it can be multiple counts for one individual. We are the team that prosecutes for this offence. We only prosecute for this offence and related offences. We are sort of a specialist team. We are based with Birmingham City Council because this is a trading standards offence, but we cover the whole of England. There are sister teams in Scotland and Wales who act very similarly to the way that we do. And in Northern Ireland, it's looked after by PSNI. They have one specialist officer who is looking after this issue. Because of the links with paramilitarism, it sits with the police rather than with the local authority. So in terms of ourselves, and the same for Scotland and Wales, although a lot of this will relate to Northern Ireland as well in terms of the nature of the offending, illegal lending is an offence under the Financial Services and Markets Act. We as local authority officers have the powers to get warrants to search properties in the same way that you guys do. We are a Weights and Measures Authority, Trading Standards Authority, which is Birmingham City Council. As I said, the maximum fine is £5,000 and/or 2 years imprisonment, but we will prosecute for every single offence that we find. So as a local authority, we've prosecuted for blackmail, for assault, for GBH. Money laundering is the standard offence that we prosecute for alongside illegal lending. The nature of illegal lending being you're taking money and putting it back into the community in terms of loans and then recouping it back and so on and so forth is pretty much the definition of money laundering. So money laundering we probably charge for in 95% of cases. The only way we wouldn't was if there was absolutely no realisable assets whatsoever. But we have charged for more serious offences, including kidnap and rape in extreme examples of illegal lending, where the loan sharks use these as methods of making sure people stay in their control and carry on paying them. How big is it? How big an issue is it? The latest figure we have was research done by the Centre for Social Justice, who are a government think tank, who completed in-depth research. It's about 2 years ago now. And they concluded that in England alone, 1.08 million people are currently using a loan shark. That is 2% of the population. That is a threefold increase on previous research, which was done in 2010, which estimated 310,000 households using loan sharks. So this is criminality that is on the increase. We have seen cases where drug dealers have actually turned to illegal lending because they see it as lower risk. They don't have a product they can get caught with, and they perceive that it might be seen as a civil offence, or they might get a slap on the wrist and nothing worse. So we have seen people transitioning towards illegal lending as a way of making high amounts of money off very vulnerable people. This map actually shows where we've had operations warrants in England in the past 6 years. The reason I put it up, and apologies to colleagues from Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, is to show, though, that it's not just a city problem. and it's not just a northern problem. There is still a perception sometimes that illegal lending happens in Liverpool, Sheffield, Newcastle, but not in leafy Kent or beautiful Cambridgeshire or on the Sussex Downs, and it absolutely does. You can see there Kent and Essex being quite high, the darker the red, sorry, the more operations we've had in that area. Devon is actually the 14th highest county in terms of our operations in the last 6 years. So just as likely to happen in rural communities, fishing communities was the case in Devon, as it is in inner city communities, and just as prevalent in the north as it is in the south. The darkest red area, so the highest incidence of illegal lending arrests, is actually Manchester. I don't think that's because Manchester is the capital of loan sharking. I think that's because we've got the best relationship, I would say, with GMP. We've got brilliant relationships with lots of police forces, but I would say GMP are slightly above everybody else in terms of the intelligence flow, in terms of the way they've kind of embedded illegal lending and what their officers look for when they're looking at other offences and various other bits and pieces. So that's why I think Manchester's higher. It's because of that relationship rather than because illegal lending is per se more prevalent. So who are we? Who are the illegal money lending team? We are a team of two halves. We have investigators who are mainly ex-police officers. They work in two teams across the country, east and west. They are out doing warrants pretty much every week. We've done a warrant in Surrey this morning, for instance. We were in Coventry last week. And that's about uncovering evidence, as you can imagine, talking to witnesses, searching for evidence in the properties, business, car and house. Normally we will search if they have a business, and then looking at putting that together as a file to go to court. The other half of the team is called liaise officers, and they do everything else. So they are awareness raising, they're about victim support, they're prevent, and they also carry a victim caseload. So anyone that is referred to us, whether or not they go on the record, whether or not they become a witness, they will get a support officer who looks at their needs holistically, their vulnerabilities, and tries to help them with all aspects of their life as far as possible. So liaise officers are a bit different. They're from a variety of backgrounds: housing, debt advice, counselling, safeguarding, financial inclusion, that type of thing. We all work from home across the country. We always have done since the team was born in 2004. And we all sort of parachute in and parachute out to different areas as and when we are needed. Investigators will go en masse to do warrants. They'll take sort of 9-10 officers to do a warrant, so we don't sort of draw on the local police force's resource. We will take local police with us in case of breach of peace, but we basically try and do it all ourselves and don't draw on their resource too much at all. Liaise officers are slightly different. They all have a patch. So in the northeast, for instance, there's 2 liaise officers who will share the Tyne-Tees and Weir areas between the two of them. And that's about the awareness raising being consistent and about that person getting real knowledge of those communities that they serve. We also have an intel cell who are based in Birmingham, and we have 2 seconded police officers, a Merseyside officer and a West Midlands police officer. As trading standards, we don't have power of arrest, and also if we find drugs, which we sometimes do when we're searching premises, the police officers gives us the power to seize those, which we couldn't do as local authority officers. Also gives us access to PNC and PND, which is super useful from our point of view as well. So how do you spot a loan shark? Maybe not what you think. People tend to have an image of kind of Phil Mitchell with baseball bats and a big gang behind him. But in reality, we've seen loan sharks in their 70s. We've seen loan sharks who are 4 foot tall and weigh next to nothing and don't think they could intimidate anybody when you first look at them. It can absolutely be anybody. The slight caveat is the offence of illegal lending only applies to those over 18. You cannot get a credit licence if you're under 18, so therefore there is no offence of unauthorised money lending if you are under 18. But that aside, it can literally be anybody. So it might be a friend of a friend. The vast majority of the people we help and support, when they took out the loan, they genuinely believed they were borrowing from a mate. They genuinely thought they were borrowing from someone who was helping them out. That might be someone they worked with. That might be someone down the pub. It might be someone they went to school with and they've known for years on the estate as the person you go to get money, cigarettes, whatever else. It might be someone they met online, but they think it's someone who is doing them a favour. We have also had organised crime groups who have been linked to illegal lending and have used it as a way to launder money from other offences and also to kind of tighten their grasp over different communities, but I will come on to that. So how do we get information? Before the team was set up in 2004, there'd been 1 prosecution in 20 years in England for illegal lending. And that wasn't because it wasn't happening. It's because it was in the too hard drawer and because people weren't reporting it. So it's very rare for someone to walk into a police office or a council building or a housing building and say, help, I'm the victim of a loan shark. What we tend to find happens is it will come out in other ways. But what we've done over the years is try to raise awareness to the point where we now do get calls coming to us direct of people trying to report loan sharks. So we have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week helpline, which is manned by one of the team at all times. And that's where the majority of our intel comes from. It comes from victims themselves, normally at breaking point. It comes from family members who are worried about individuals. It comes from third-party organisations as well. In addition to the helpline, we have live chat on our website, which we introduced during COVID, but it had such a big impact, we've kept it. That's available Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, again, staffed by one of the team. And I think sometimes people feel it's a bit more anonymous than the helpline. It's not their voice, they can type their words and then they can leave the chat at any point if they want to, if they feel uncomfortable. So we get about 15% now of our intel through live chat. We also have email, we have social media platforms as well, and we get information directly from the police as well. What happens when that comes in? It passes to our intel team, who will do a number of background checks. So the first thing we check is, are they registered? Is this person authorised to lend money? And the thing that we have to prove is that they are doing so in the course of trade or business. Now, in the course of trade or business is not set down in legislation. It doesn't actually say what that means. It's done on precedent. We tend to say it means that they are making money, because that's in the course of trade or business. So if you're lending money to 5 people, you lend £200, you get £200 back. That's not in the course of trade or business, unless you're getting something else in return, which we have seen: sexual favours, status in the community, that kind of thing. But generically speaking, in the majority of cases, we would say you have to charge interest to be doing it in the course of trade or business, and we would look for there to be at least 5 people who are being lent to. Sometimes the person who's reporting that may not know that. If it is a cash business, the loan shark may make them believe they are the only person who has borrowed in this way. They may feel they're the only person that's borrowed in this way, whereas actually there's 40, 50, 60, 70 people who are in the loan shark's grasp and on the loan shark's books. Once we've checked the FCA register to make sure they are not authorised, we will look at Experian, land registry, and do bank inquiries to look at their turnover. So one of the slightly surprising things about loan sharks in the last few years is they seem to be shifting to bank transfer. Historically, I've been doing this job 17 years now. It was a cash business. You know, victims would take money to the gym. They'd take money to the loan shark's house. We had one guy who got them to put it in his wheelie bin. But it would be about cash. It would be cash lent out, cash coming back. Last year, over 50% of the loan sharks we arrested and the people we supported, it was done by bank transfer. So a loan going one way and then repayments being recouped back, often through multiple accounts to try and maybe disguise it, but not very well, because a lot of the transaction references gave away exactly what it was. Fabulous for us. It gives us a great audit trail in terms of taking a prosecution forward. It means we've actually had witnessless prosecutions where people haven't had to be brave enough to go to court because we've got it on the banking. That said, there are still 50% of loan sharks who do not use bank transfer. They still operate in cash. And that's where we need people to be brave and go on the record so we can get the warrant to search property and look for cash, etc., etc. But bank inquiries are always done just to look at what's going on. And sometimes it becomes apparent, as you guys will know, that there's no normal transactions going through a bank account. There's lots of cash deposits going in, that sort of thing. Once we've got to a point where we think it could be worked up into a warrant, it's passed on to an investigator from the intel cell to do further work, to talk to the victim, maybe take a statement if they're willing to do so, and build up to getting a warrant to search the suspect's property. We then start the support process from a liaise point of view. So we're looking at that individual. We're doing a needs assessment to make sure things like, are they at risk of losing their home? If they're paying the loan shark extortionate amounts of money, does that mean that they haven't been paying their rent or their mortgage? We look at what's their mental health like. Have they got depression? Are they suicidal? Are they a risk to themselves or other people because of the loan shark or because of anything else that's going on in their lives? There's often multiple vulnerabilities with loan shark victims and multiple life events that have happened to make them end up in this situation, although not always. So after the warrant, we will arrest and question the suspect, and we look at further inquiries from that point onwards. At that point, we're looking at, can we charge? Are we looking to release under investigation? And things like that. And then we will take that through the court system. It's worth noting we don't use the CPS to prosecute. We prosecute ourselves as a local authority. So we have our own specialist solicitor, and we then will employ barristers to take cases to court. And we've actually only ever lost 2 cases in 20 years. which we think is a great success rate. We're very, very annoyed about the 2 that we lost, don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't say it's an easy offence to prove because the investigators would kill me, but fundamentally illegal lending without that authorisation, if you can show that they're lending to multiple people, then that's an easy way to sort of say this is illegal lending. We then look to show the entirety, we then look at related offences, and we then look at what impact that's had on individuals in terms of victim impact statements, to show the courts the extent of what's going on. In quite a few cases we've had in the last 12 months, the judge has actually made money laundering the primary offence where we've had large amounts of money. Mainly so, I think, they could sentence above the 2-year limit for illegal money lending. So we've had a few cases where they've said, right, now the level of money laundering that's gone on in this case, £500,000, etc., that warrants money laundering to be the primary offence, which means that the person's going to get 36 months, 48 months, rather than the 2 years that they'd be restricted to with illegal money lending. Which I think is a good thing, because it shows that there's a spectrum of illegal lending, from someone on an estate lending to 20 people, charging them 20% interest and not really threatening them, maybe buying the kids selection boxes at Christmas. There's still harm there because they're not doing affordability checks, they're not making sure those loans aren't detrimental to those individuals, but fundamentally they're not a community living in fear. And they're not a community paying ridiculous interest rates. The other end, you've got the organised crime groups and the loan sharks, where the greed has taken over. We've evidenced as a team in excess of 130,000% APR being charged by illegal lenders. And it's regularly that people have paid 18, 19, 20 times back what they've borrowed at the point at which they contact us. So there's the detriment. And then the threats come in, coercive control. Your partner doesn't know about this loan. Wouldn't it be awful if they found out? Your kids go to school with my kids, you don't want anything happening to them. Or the explicit threats of violence and so on. But quite often it's just wearing people down, 150 WhatsApp messages a day, hammering on the front door at 5 a.m, following you to school, and saying things like, your friend Tracy wants a loan and I can't give him a loan if you don't carry on paying. I'd hate to have to tell her that, and just infecting people's lives. There's a girl I'm working with at the moment, and she borrowed £50 for school shoes for her son. And she agreed to pay back £250. She knew that's what she was doing. She signed up to do that. She had no other way of getting the money. So she borrowed this £50. She paid back the £250. The loan shark kept coming back and asking for more. She said, no, I paid you what we agreed. We're done. He put on Facebook that she owed him money for drugs. And her mum saw that. Her Auntie Betty saw that. Her employer saw that. And it had a massive impact on her mental health. And it's those sorts of tactics we see time in, time out being used. Friend or foe? As I said, the majority of our clients believe the loan shark is their friend at the point of borrowing. It makes it really hard for us to put out warning notices, because we say, don't use loan sharks. And half our target market would say, well, we're not. I borrowed from Brian down the pub. I borrowed from Marie at the school gates. And often illegal lenders are friendly, charismatic people. And we go after, we've done warrants, and we knock on people's door and we say, have you borrowed from Joe Bloggs? And they'll say, yes. He's one of my mates. He's really helped me out. And we sit down and we'll say, you've paid back 6 times what you borrowed. No, that can't be right. He's my mate. He's helped me out. And they still at that point will believe that that person is their friend. The gentleman we prosecuted for rape in the Northwest years ago now, he'd made millions, absolutely millions, off vulnerable people in Runcorn. And we had people at court wearing free Nico t-shirts. Because they believed he'd been wronged. So if you carry on paying them, if you don't question them, loan sharks can be your best friend. If you challenge what you've paid back, if you struggle to pay, then that's when it gets nefarious for people, and that's when people start to struggle. One of the tactics the loan sharks will often use is make people pay things back so quickly that they have to take out a further loan. So you borrow £500 in the middle of this month just to get you to the end of the month, but then on payday you have to pay them £1,000 back. So next month you have to borrow another £500. Payday, you have to pay them £1,000 back. The month after, you pay them £500. When we look at our victim stats, the majority have had more than one loan, because the loan shark will trap them in this cycle of debt. And again, another lady I'm working with at the moment, she earns £1,086 a month. She's got 3 children. The loan shark is currently taking £900 of that as repayment of a debt that added up, we think, in lots of small loans to just shy of £3,000. She pays back £26,000. Loan shark says she still owes £16,000, and she's taking £900 off her every single month out of her £1,086 income. So victims can also be involved in a crime to repay a loan shark. These are all things that we have seen. We've seen loan sharks where they've used kids or young people to do antisocial behaviour on estates, to cycle past people's houses, to throw things at windows, dog poo on doorsteps, that kind of thing, being noisy at 3 a.m. We've had people paid to assault other people and try and claim money for them and act as a collector for the loan shark. We've had a number of people who were forced to shoplift, either by the loan shark. We had one guy in Manchester who drove people to the Trafford Centre on a Friday afternoon and gave them a shopping list. And whatever they could steal off that shopping list, 10% of the value of those goods was taken off their loan. More often than not, though, we have people who will shoplift because they literally have no money left. My lady, who's got £188 a month to live off with her 3 kids, you know, if she can't afford to feed them, then shoplifting is something she might consider. We've had people forced into prostitution, and quite often the loan shark will suggest that as a method of people repaying. We've had one recently who suggested that people set up an OnlyFans account and pay them back that way. People where it's been suggested they can either grow, sell or store drugs for the loan shark. People pushed into car crime and burglary, either by the loan shark in terms of if you burgle that house, you rob that house, and the value of the goods comes off your loan, or because they literally don't see any other way that they're going to be able to pay their rent and actually be able to keep a roof over their heads and their families' heads as well. So what to look out for? No contract, no paperwork. Any legal lender gives you paperwork. They give you lengthy paperwork with lots of detail that no one reads, but the detail is there for people. Loan sharks don't do that. It's a handshake agreement. Quite often they won't mention interest at the point at which the loan is taken out. It's, oh God, you know what? I've just overheard you talking to Kath about your washing machine blowing up. It's awful when you've got young kids. I remember what it was like. Mine are older now, so I've got a bit of spare cash. I'll lend you 400 quid. You get a new washing machine, love. You pay me back when you can. And that's how the loan is given. People don't make an active choice most of the time to go to a loan shark. It's a friend. It's someone being charismatic and nice and friendly and helpful at the right time. We say there no paperwork. I would say 90% of cases we have no paperwork. We had, again, a Manchester case where a PCSO who'd been trained by us went to speak to a football hooligan, known football hooligan, who had a pub by Manchester City's ground. When he went inside, he noticed there was a big stack of loan books called piggy bank loans. And he thought, there's no way this dude got authorization to lend money. So when we checked, he hadn't got authorization to lend money. We built up enough intelligence picture to get a warrant to search his property, found evidence of illegal lending and a cannabis farm at the back of the property. And he went away for several years as a result of that. That's unusual, I'd say. Having payment books and trying to make themselves look legitimate is unusual. The vast majority don't give paperwork. Similarly, they won't give receipts for payment, so people don't know how much they're being ripped off. And that's what keeps them paying. They will often resort to violence, intimidation and blackmail if repayments are missed, people forced into crime. They don't do affordability checks. As I said, they will lend money to anybody because they don't care if you can afford to pay them back. They will make sure that they are your priority. They'll take people's cash cards and other securities. Increasingly, we're seeing passports being taken in migrant communities. There seems to be an issue of illegal lending in international students at the moment, particularly of African origin. And we are seeing that happen time and time again, that they keep people's passports. They make them be guarantor for other people in terms of, you know, you can't have your passport back until your mate's paid me back as well. And then if something happens and they need to go back home or just want to go back home, they can't without the loan shark say so. They rarely advertise. They find clients by word of mouth and often very, very high charges for defaulting. Not unusual for a loan shark to double what you owe if you miss a payment. So if you borrow £3,000 and you're paying back £100 a week and you get it down to £2,500, you miss one payment, you now owe £5,000 because they'll double what you owe. And it just makes sure that people don't get to pay them off and don't get to pay them back. It's depressing, this, isn't it? They exploit whole families. It has a massive impact on people's lives. You know, we've worked with children who know that on Thursday night the money man comes, so we hide behind the sofa with the light off until he's gone. You know, we've worked with people pushed to the edge by illegal money lenders, and they definitely do target vulnerable people, but that vulnerability may not be obvious. It might not be a sort of standard traditional vulnerability, if you like. It might just be a change in life circumstances, a loss of job, breakdown of a relationship, gambling addiction. We see that time and time again as well. Sometimes loan shark victims are asset rich, cash poor. They have nice houses, they have nice cars, but they have no cash flow. They have cash flow issues. Other times they are people on social housing estates who have nothing. It does vary in terms of the victim as well as in terms of the loan shark. I think last year 1 in 5 of the people we helped was actually a mortgage holder. They owned their own property. So it's not always people in social housing or private rented that are the ones being exploited. A few examples of loan sharks. This one allegedly 4.5 million% APR. Good old The Sun for exaggerating things. made £200,000, was jailed, told one debtor he would break his legs and bury his dead body. He actually showed him the patch of ground in his back garden where he was going to bury his body, told the man he'd be put in a wheelchair if he didn't make a repayment. Slightly different one. This is actually a Welsh case. They claim this is Britain's oldest loan shark. So this is Tabitha. She is 83 years old. She worked for a legal company and then went out on her own. And she didn't care about her victims. They were struggling to make ends meet, but she still sent threatening texts when payments were late to make sure money kept coming in. And yeah, she pleaded guilty and was told she avoided prison by a whisker because of her advanced age. But 83 years old, not what you would expect a loan shark to be. Another example, 31-month prison sentence for a chap in Coventry. And the interesting thing with this one was we got a criminal behaviour order for the first time, meaning he can't go back to the area he was lending in or provide or collect on the loans for the next 5 years after he is out of prison or face a further jail term. So that's a positive thing and something we will look to do in the future as well. This was a case in South Yorkshire last summer. A guy called Richard Dawson got a 7-year prison sentence in total. He actually put victims in the boot of his car and drove them to cash points across Barnsley to take out money to give to him. One of the victims told us drug dependent. A lot of his victims were drug dependent, and he believed they wouldn't be believed if they actually went to the authorities. But one victim would say, you know, he'd turn up with blue gloves on, you're in for a beating. If he didn't have his blue gloves on as he walked up your path, you knew you were okay that week. Known to the police, known locally as a nasty piece of work, 7-year sentence last summer. You won't be able to read that, but that's an example of a printed loan agreement that we discovered, and that is what it says. So this is a loan shark who was in the southeast of England, basically forcing women to have sex with him, taking photos and video of them doing so, and threatening to release that if they didn't carry on paying. You'd think no one would ever sign that contract, but people did. People signed that contract and then thought they were bound by it and thought they were tied to it. And of course, as soon as he had video footage and photos of them, he had that hold over them that they didn't want that being released to their community, to their parents, to anybody. Of course you wouldn't. And he carried on doing that for a period of time. That's a particularly nasty one that never sits right with me at all. If someone says they borrowed from a friend, these are the questions that we would ask. Is that friend lending to anyone else? This is in the course of trade or business. How do you make payments? Have you got bank details? Do you pay in cash? Does the lender take them to the cash point as a favour? Again, something we see regularly, as with a lot of trading standards offences, is loan sharks taking people to the cash point, to the bank, to take out money. Sometimes at 1 minute past midnight when benefits have gone in, sometimes just sporadically throughout the day. We've got a case in Leeds at the moment where the very elderly, very vulnerable lady hands a big wad of cash through her window to the loan shark every week. And actually the neighbours had reported her because they believed that she was doing drugs, and that's what the neighbours thought was going on. But actually it's an illegal lender coming to take his money through her window every week. And as well, the thing that would differentiate a friend loan to a non-friend loan is, are they charging interest? We listened recently to a load of calls for a debt advice agency, and none of the victims recognised the word interest. So we'd say, you know, this person that you've borrowed money from, are they charging you interest? They'd all say no. And you say, so what did you borrow? 600 quid. What are you paying back? 750 quid. So they're charging interest, but they didn't recognise the word interest. So we're changing that now a little bit to sort of say, are you paying back more than you borrowed? But if there's one question to ask, I would say it's, are you afraid of anyone that you owe money to? As a standard question. We have financial investigators on the team as well. Loan sharks often make a lot of money, and we will chase that through the courts as much as anything else. We're currently chasing 32 million through the courts, bearing in mind we've only got 4 financial investigators on the team, and they're doing all the pre-inquiries as well. So things to look for in bank statements, rounded figures. So a loan going one way and then lots of repayments coming back the other way. Repeated people with different surnames, so it doesn't look like family borrowing. That's something we would want to know about. The notation around that might be things like loan, owed, money, debt, payback, those sorts of things. And quite often it's fairly obvious in the bank statements when you start looking at them that what's going on is illegal lending. From the lender's point of view, lots of third-party credits coming in, lots of different people, those adding up to more than the debits that are given out, often with multiple accounts. It would always be round figures. Loan sharks don't tend to lend £12.84 or recoup £12.84. It tends to be sort of solid numbers in terms of the amounts of money that's going through the bank accounts as well. On warrants, there are a list of things to look out for. I mentioned the PCSO in Manchester who spotted the books, but various things in terms of cash, people's passports, other people's jewellery, USB sticks, computers, mobile phones. The biggest thing we seize on warrants is documentation, mobile phones and cash. Occasionally passports and jewellery as well. We used to see loan sharks with paper lists. We used to see loan sharks where it was written on a calendar. They had physical books of people they'd lent money to, what they'd paid back and everything else. Nowadays, it's more likely to be on the cloud. It's more likely to be on the mobile phone. And that's a key piece of evidence for us. Again, we've had people who have been arrested by police forces and have gone to interview and have said, oh, no, I'm not a drug dealer. I lend people money, as a defence almost. And are quite surprised to hear that that's actually a criminal offence as well. So just things to bear in mind that we can do. So additional things that we are happy to supply and talk to. The first thing to say is we will do training to anybody, totally free of charge. We'd love to get in and chat to neighbourhood teams. This is what happened across Manchester, and it made a massive difference in terms of people starting to spot the signs of illegal lending in other criminality and then be able to refer people to us in a way that was meaningful. So, if that's in your power to give, then please feel free to contact us. The same for the Welsh team, the same for the Scottish team, the same for Christine in Northern Ireland. We would love to get in front of people and talk to them about this offence. We still get people who walking into police stations, talking to police officers or phoning 999 101 and being told this is a civil offence. We had a case in the northeast last week, and the police officer said, well, he's entitled to charge interest if you're not paying him back. Well, actually, he isn't. It's a criminal offence, and we will take that off you. We will look at that in its entirety ourselves. We're not creating work for you guys. We just want the information to flow through to us. So that training is available. It's free of charge. We can do it online. We can do face-to-face. We can do 20 minutes. We'd like an hour if at all possible. But we're happy to come out multiple times and deliver that training because we do feel it makes a massive difference in the intelligence flow that goes through. We've also got checklists for warrants. That's a notebook crib sheet you can see on the screen there, which we all supply. We've got loads of publicity stuff, internal and public facing posters, leaflets, etc. If you want to supply for your force, we'd be happy to send them across to you and get them sort of distributed into your systems. We've also got keyword checks that we can do on Intel systems, including a user guide for niche, where it actually kind of talks you through what to look out for on Intel systems. I guarantee every force in the countries, all of them, will have intelligence on illegal lending that we don't have. I guarantee it is there. When it's been run recently, we did one not so long ago with Staffordshire Police, and we got about 30 hits just from very, very simple keyword checks. We probably would have got more if we'd gone into more detail. So again, if that's something in your power to give, that would be a fabulous ask for us in terms of intelligence we can then take away and look at and hopefully develop ourselves. Prevention's always better than cure. I mentioned at the start that liaise officers look at stopping people going to loan sharks. So we promote credit unions and something called CDFIs, who are community development finance institutions. There's one called Salad Money, there's one called Moneyline, as a couple of examples. These are regulated lenders who are, the interest rate credit unions, for instance, can charge is capped by legislation. They can't charge more than 3% a month APR on a loan, and that makes a massive difference to people. The difference as well with credit unions and CDFIs is they will lend small amounts of money. So when we're working with communities who need to borrow £200, even if they had a brilliant credit rating, the bank doesn't want to lend them £200. It's not making money for them. Credit unions will, CDFIs will, and they'll work with people to try and build credit ratings, build a history so they can borrow more money or borrow it from places that charge even lower interest rates in the future and build themselves back up. We also talk to people about debt advice. We get a lot of people borrowing from loan sharks because bailiffs are at the door or because they've had a red bill or about to be cut off, and that's what they're worried about. So we do a lot of work with debt advice as well. We are shameless awareness raisers. So we do social media campaigns throughout the year. We've just done Stop Loan Sharks Week in May. We will do a campaign over the summer about school uniform because that's a big reason people go to illegal lenders. And we'll do a big campaign October, November time in the run up to Christmas because, again, that's a big push for people to go to loan sharks. We'd love to have police services sharing our social media campaigns. It has a big impact as trusted partners and people who have a much bigger reach than ourselves. Again, if that's something you can help with, we'd be very grateful. It takes people an average of 4 years to report a loan shark because they believe this person is their friend. They have to realise they're not their friend, realise they're a loan shark, realise that's a criminal offence, and then realise we exist. The vast majority of clients we work with, we've gone to them because when we've done a warrant at a loan shark's property or from bank accounts, we've found 38 people they're lending money to and we've called on them rather than them coming to us. That flow of intelligence is the thing that we need. We're very good at what we do. Once we get the intelligence, it's getting the phone to ring that is the real challenge for us. We had a case a few years ago that West Yorkshire Police had to take back from us in Halifax because there was a legal challenge to the team about whether we had the power to prosecute outside Birmingham. That went to the High Court, and the High Court ruled that we have the power to prosecute outside Birmingham, so that never happens again. So fundamentally now we will take on any illegal money lending case and we will run it and we will deal with it from start to finish ourselves, and take that away from your workloads, which hopefully it's a positive thing. Promotion and publicity, the helpline is there. As I said, that's 24 hours, 7 days a week. The website is there as well, and the email address too. But if you've got any concerns about anybody, just let me know. I had a message from Lancashire Police last week about a lady who'd borrowed from her former employer. The lady was now in a care home and was still paying that money back. She was determined this person was their friend. But the police came to us and said, could this be illegal lending? We said, absolutely. We've been in touch with the care home. We're going to visit the lady and have a conversation to see if we can help her. It can be that simple in terms of stuff coming through to us and then us being able to take action upon it. But we just need it to come through. What's in it for you if I haven't completed my sales pitch enough yet? So the big things to take away, this is not a civil offence. It's a criminal offence, unauthorised money lending, criminal offence, 2-year sentence. The people we are looking at, a lot of them you will be looking at. They will be causing problems in your areas. They will be linked to organised crime. They will be people you would rather were not there and were removed from the streets, and we can help you do that. 3/4 of loan sharks plead guilty. It's unusual for us to end up in a trial, but sometimes we do. And the vast majority plead guilty. Where they do not plead guilty, we have got a 98% conviction rate in making sure these people are prosecuted successfully. We don't use the CPS. Police forces tend to like that bit. We prosecute ourselves. And please use us as a disruption tactic. We've had that happen before where, organised criminals have been doing illegal lending. If we can get them in prison for 2-3 years, it can disrupt that OCG activity to a degree. And we're happy to be involved in discussions around that across the country. I mentioned the free training and advice, and we do victim support ourselves as well. So again, that's not something that the police would have to do. So just please, we are here, we are a resource. So are Scotland, so are Wales, so is Northern Ireland, although there's only Christine, bless her. So please do utilise us for anything that you come across. That is my email address. That is the hotline number. So I've left 10 minutes in case you guys have any questions, but please get in touch. If you want to put details in the chat and I'll get in touch with you, that's fine. If we can sort some training, if we can look at what we can do together, we'd be absolutely delighted to work with you. Thank you.
Amanda already.
Well, Kat, thank you very much. That is, I don't think you really need a sales pitch. I think I can't really see anyone that would be online that wouldn't have come into contact with vulnerable people that probably aren't potential victims. And I would, I think the work you do is fantastic. I love the fact that you can prosecute yourselves, and I think anyone listening would love your conviction rate as well, because as an investigator, it's if you run at 50%, you're lucky. So thank you for joining us today. I think we do have a few questions. I saw people. Was it Amanda?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Catherine, thank you very much. That was a really excellent presentation. Very punchy, very clear. Just wondering, have you sort of come across any people hiding things in crypto in terms of proceeds rather than leaving sort of cash lying about or having it go through an overt fiat bank account? And also, is there anything going through like the Chinese money laundering, the underground, the Chinese, the Asian equivalent of the Hawala networks for shifting cash?
Never had the second one. We've had one case where crypto was involved. My gut feeling is the majority of loan sharks are not yet that sophisticated. We seem to have just realised bank transfer is a thing in the world of loan sharking. That's not to say, however, it won't happen in the future, or it isn't happening at the moment, and it's a different type of loan shark. And, you know, I always say I know an awful lot about reported loan sharks and about people who report loan sharks. We know very little about those who are not reported. So it may well be happening, but we haven't got a massive evidence bank for it.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
Excellent question, Amanda. Thank you very much. Anyone online who would like to ask Kath any questions? I don't think you're going to get away lightly, Kath. Again, no, thank you. And I think my key takeaway, which I'd urge you all to think about from Kath's presentation, is that we all through our careers come into contact with the most vulnerable people. And I think that little checklist is a really useful tool. Mel and I were just discussing what we can do from a PFE NDF perspective and the wider Police Federation to try and get your message out there, Kath. So we'll put our thinking hats on, and I think, and I'd urge anyone online to, if you like what you've seen today, and I'm sure you have, policing loves free training. So tap up your bosses, your senior management teams, and say, look, there's some training here that we could all benefit from, and also think wider and go speak to your neighbourhoods, because I think they're the keys. Whilst you as investigators will go and deal with people once they've suffered crime, it's our neighbourhood teams that we need to get that intelligence flowing. And also I think it's worth tapping into your head of intelligence and actually see, are they aware that there's a niche key search? Why haven't we got one for Athena, etc.? So I think there's some really interesting stuff, Kath, which I'm sure we're going to come back to you on. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day, guys.
We'll definitely be in contact, Kath. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. So we're into a break now. So we'll be back at 11:30 to hear from Adrian and the demands on modern detectives. So see you back at 12:30.
See you back at 12:30. Bye, everyone.
Welcome back, everybody. We thought we had a bit of a technical issue there, but we've overcome that just in time. So I'm going to hand over now to Adrian, who's going to be talking about demands on modern detectives. So over to you, Adrian. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, I was getting nervous myself there for a moment. I'll just share my, so people see me. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation to speak. I'm going to just share my screen and hopefully this will work. Can you see? What can you see, Mel?
Just see, we can still see you, Adrian. Nothing being shared at the moment.
It is, but it's not there.
Oh, here we go. Oh gosh, it's being shared infinity, I think there. Do you want Claire to share them, Adrian?
What's that look like now? Is that any good?
That's still in infinity, I think. So if you stop sharing.
Yeah, I shall do that.
And then Claire, can we get you? Claire will do the slides, and then when you want Claire to move on, if you just say next slide, Adrian, and we'll get that sorted. So if you stop sharing your screen. Isn't it always the way where in the rehearsal it goes absolutely smoothly, and then okay. So Claire's just going to access your slides. Here we go. There you go, Adrian. Over to you.
Technology will always let you down, you know that. Okay, so I'll talk about some research that I and colleagues at John Moores have done into detective capacity and capability. The research, so there's 3 cases, England and Wales, Finland and Denmark, and although the field work was completed at the end of last year, we're basically still analysing some of the data, so it's kind of hot off the press as much as anything is in academia. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'll just say something about myself. I was a detective for a long time, and now I'm an associate professor at John Moores University in Liverpool, and I lead the research efforts of the centre and also PhD programs in policing and security. And I'll put a link on there if anybody is interested in reading anything that I've written. I've written quite a lot of reports and texts, journal articles, books, etc. On investigation and intelligence as well. And some of those are in the police library at the College of Policing's library. So if you're interested in reading further into some of the stuff that I've done, it's there for you. Can you move to the next slide, please? So why did we do the research? Well, I'm a member of a couple of working groups. The investigator, I think it's called, there's a retention group and wellbeing group, and there's now a recruitment group, which is a very new development. And I'm also a member of something called the Academic Reference Group, which is chaired by Martin Brennan, who's the ACC at Cambridge, in Cambridgeshire, and lots of academics from across the country who have similar interests, largely in investigator wellbeing, I should say. And although that was my interest initially, I think I've expanded that now to look at kind of business risk. So those were the drivers, really. So investigator wellbeing, many of you will be well aware of this. I don't want to teach anybody to suck eggs. I know that I know that you know that well-being is a matter of significant concern, but so also is the fact that crime detection rates are low. The last couple of victims surveys have been haven't made very happy reading in terms of the victims' confidence in investigators and their views on the quality of investigations that have been carried out on their behalf. And then I'm sure many of you will know that consistently HMRC, FRS, in their appeal inspections are reporting on inadequate in investigative standards. I think the most recent one was Lincolnshire last week. So this it's really current as an issue. So those are the drivers for the research, and we just felt, well, maybe it would be a good idea to go and speak to people who are, conducting investigations or who are affected by this dynamic that we see, particularly around the kind of unattractiveness of the role, I think, and the forces challenge in encouraging people to think about, or say careers, but even jobs as investigators. So maybe not, even in the short term. So that's exactly what we did. So if you can move to the next slide, Claire, please. Just bring up all those. I think this is beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we interviewed investigators, detectives, largely, some PSIs across 5 forces in England and Wales. And then after that, I went out to Finland with a colleague and interviewed detectives involved in all kinds of crime investigation, kind of main CID, but also those involved in investigating sexual abuse cases, child abuse cases, homicide, so a wide range of investigators. And then in Denmark, 2 tranches to 2 visits to Denmark, one to interview detectives who are working in the Danish equivalent of the NCA, it's called the NSK, and then also then 2 visits to police areas in Copenhagen and in Zealand to interview detectives dealing with local cases, or what they call small cases, but daily cases, burglary, robbery, theft, that the kind of bread and butter investigation, really. And then we've looked at those cases as 3 separately, and then 1 comparative case. So did we see anything? What is unique in the UK? Are the challenges being experienced by detectives in England and Wales different to anywhere else in the world? And I think the answer is no, not very much. I mean, it is very different. I think that because I also do some work in Norway. And I was external examiner at the Garda College, in Ireland for 4 years. So I visited a lot of different forces, and of course in each of those cases, population is much smaller. There's a single police force. The persistent challenge of 43 police forces. I know this is something that had the pleasure of speaking to Gavin Stevens recently about his plans for, or his thoughts about, I wouldn't say plans, I think that's probably grossly overstating it, but his thoughts about kind of future of policing and regional police forces, those kind of developments. So they have one police service with relatively small number of officers and servicing relatively small population. So I think that what is very different is just the complexity of the environment in the UK compared to most other places. I think that's something always to be aware of. I don't think there are any simple solutions, and there certainly aren't, given that complexity. So what we've done is written up our findings and presented them to those working groups that I talked about. I think I did present them to Mel and colleagues in the Fed at the end of last year too. But I think obviously things, as I said, this is very much live research, and it's it's kind of changed a bit, I hope. So yeah, what we found is so lots of inexperienced officers. That didn't come as a surprise to me, because I actually was commissioned back in 2019 by the Police Chiefs Council to evaluate some of the fast track schemes that were emerging around the country. And at the same time, colleagues in Canterbury, Christchurch were commissioned by the Met to look at the direct entry scheme, and we spoke a lot at those groups, around kind of common issues that were emerging. So yeah, lots of inexperience. So I think that when I first got interested in this subject, which was back to 2016, when HMRC announced that they believed there was a shortage of 5,000 investigators across England and Wales. I don't think there were 5,000 vacancies. So there were a large number of vacancies, and then the questions were being asked about, well, was the establishment right? And by HMRC's estimation, when you aggregated that across the 43 forces, there were probably 5,000 more detectives needed. And then recently, through my membership of the groups I've talked about, I've kind of been told, and I've no reason to doubt it, but it's not something I can independently verify. I've been told that actually the issue isn't now so much that there are vacancies, but that it's the inexperience of the workforce. So lots of people come in, and particularly where they've come in through the direct entry route or the fast track scheme, where they don't spend very much time in uniform, and they don't do that kind of apprenticeship that I did, and many of you will have done over the years, where you kind of cut your teeth on smaller cases, as my Scandinavian colleagues would call them, and do serve a kind of apprenticeship, really. And one of the things this links to point two, really, I think, is just a lack of experience to support those. And I am talking about, I think there is a difference, and I hope you agree with me. There's a difference between those kind of frontline roles, PBP, CID, and specialist detectives. I think specialist detectives get it pretty easy, actually, compared. Sorry to offend anybody. I was a specialist detective for most of my career, so there's an element of poacher turned gamekeeper here too. But I think that task focus and that you have when you're a specialist, and the level of support you have, and the level of equipment and kit that you have access to, and just the facilities, operational support, is just so much greater than you have locally. And that, people graduate to that, don't they? That's the aspiration of many. It was certainly my aspiration, was to get involved in investigation of serious organised crime, and I was lucky enough to be able to do that. But then it, as kind of experience kind of gravitates away from the front line, the overall experience of the workforce is diluted, and people need help, and it's not there when they need it. And I know there's been plans over the, there was initially the thought that people on the fast track would get 1-to-1 mentorship, and that went down to 1-to-3 and 1-to-5, and in some it's even less, even less than that. There's something that people keep telling me, or told me, I should say, often, was that they just didn't have that support that they felt they needed. And then that idea of, too much work. I mean, I think that's the reality here. there are too many cases to be investigated. There's not almost complete inability to manage demand. I don't know how you do it. That's something we maybe think about, reflect on. How do you manage demand? Where do you get experienced cops from when they just aren't there? How do you get enough experience into the front line when they're just not available? People aren't available. And what impact does that have on the those who are actually doing the work? I think they're really significant questions that probably much more difficult to answer than I can effectively hear. I know recently I was speaking to a head of crime for one of the forces in England, and they told me that for example, that people don't want to join. I think this is the point I'm going to make. They had 28 officers who'd applied to leave CID and not a single applicant for CID. So they'd open, they had vacancies, but not a single applicant for those vacancies. And moreover, 28 people who put in requests to leave because they were finding that they just couldn't manage couldn't keep a decent work-life balance. And that obviously is goes to the last point too. And I think it's so I'm saying it's about well-being, or my argument is rather, I should say. So it's about well-being. It's extremely important, but it also, police should be thinking of this as a business. It isn't just about well-being. It's about how do we manage those business risks to the organisation. And so one of the things I do as well is I'm a marker on the what used to be PNAC is now the Executive Leadership Programme, the College of Police, and I get the chance to read submissions by people on that course where they talk about some of these issues. And of course, I wouldn't disclose anything about them, but I know this is various forces have tried various things to kind of supplement numbers in CID, but what they can't do, of course, is deliver that experiential knowledge. Often people are being posted into posts as a kind of stopgap measure, but it's and I noticed today, for example, in the police oracle circulation, one force is trying to poach detectives from another force, and so I saw this a couple of years ago when I was researching firearms teams. There's a kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul mentality emerging as well. That, and I think that's not a good long-term strategy, I would say. Anyway, I say for discussion maybe. Next slide, please. So looking at the data, and I hope we recognise that. What my comments largely are coming from the data. Yes, of course, I'm bringing in my own experiential knowledge, but largely what I say is dictated by the data. So, in terms of low crime detection rates, are current investigative practices and processes and resources sufficient to meet public safety demands? And the answer, clearly is no. So that raises questions about whether current approaches are adequately tailored to the crime landscape of today. Detectives tell me often that they don't have the facilities, for example, to deal with digital or cyber-enabled crime. What is the service doing about that? And again, when I say the service, as we know, it always comes back to what are 43 forces doing to that, doing about that? Is a big question. And again, these have the potential to weaken public confidence. And the trust and confidence in policing is such a live debate now, and this kind of feeds into that. Next slide, please. Victim dissatisfaction with investigations. I think there's a question here: do victims expect too much of the system? Are they aware of the challenges that detectives, forces are facing, and do they expect too much? That's not a question for me to answer, by the way. but I think it's realistic to at least ask it. But one thing I think you see from the victim surveys and from the HMI inspection reports, which I'll go on to next, I think, is that these are systemic issues. They're not isolated cases. It's not about isolated or not about individual frailty or failings. These are systemic issues. Next slide, please. I mean, following on from the point I've just made, really, it seems to me that performance issues are linked more to systemic constraints than they are to individual investigator capabilities or even individual force capabilities. I mentioned there about maybe there's a need for reform of police oversight mechanisms. I know that Andy Cook has been talking for a long time about the inspectorate having more teeth, so that when they're reporting on forces and finding that performance is suboptimal, that's basically what they do. They report it. They don't have any ability to sanction forces who then don't make the changes that the HMRC feels are necessary, and maybe that's something that needs to be considered going forward. Next slide, please. And yeah, I think I've maybe covered this already. But I think maybe something I didn't say is population demographics. I think there is a kind of Carol Cox and I, Carol's head of policing at John Moores, I work very closely with her, recently published a paper about the kind of what people joining the police now expect. And I think a narrative has developed over the last few years that for many, whether it's Gen Z factor or not, for many, the police is no longer seen as a long-term career. They'll come in, they'll do 5 years there. And I'm not sure the evidence supports that narrative. Certainly people do leave early because they're frustrated by some of the things that we're talking about today. But I don't know if actually if their intention when they joined was to leave. Certainly there's some evidence to suggest it's not. And I haven't mentioned it in my references here, but maybe I should have. I can point people to that research if they want to read it. I think that's interesting research because there is a strong narrative that people don't join for a career anymore. They just want to be in a short time. I'm not sure that's always the case. And the learning curve is steep, very steep. And I think for people on the fast track, and I know again there's nothing more constant in policing than change, is there? And I know things are changing again, but certainly the detectives I interviewed were coming in. They were doing their police training, they were doing their detective training at the same time they were doing a degree program, whether it be an apprenticeship degree or the degree holders program, and also in having to sit the NIE, compile a portfolio of evidence, which when you go to Finland and Denmark, for example, as I've done and speak to them about their training, they have nothing like that. People are just trained to be cops in the training school, very experiential based, very practical, hands-on training, and then they're expected to develop in the workplace. So I think we ask an awful lot of our young cops. Next slide, please. And it's not just the young cops who are suffering, as I mentioned earlier about the lack of experience. People are being asked to mentor, and often the ones who are asked to take on the greatest mentorship load are the ones who have the highest caseloads as well. The experienced cops who have the responsibility for either serious investigations or serious investigations, and what we're seeing, of course, is burnout. High sickness levels in some forces, not in every force. It's not consistent across forces, but certainly people wanting to move. So added pressure on people to leave that front line, if you like, main CID and PVP, and either seek promotion or go into a specialist role. And we see that even with the new COBs that are coming in on the schemes, some of them very quickly are promoted or seeking promotion or advancement as they see it into other roles and away from where there's the greatest need and why they were employed in the first place. So it's extremely challenging environment. Next slide, please. And the impact on well-being is obvious, and I think many of you will be well aware of this. Can you have the next slide, please? So just quickly, something about how the cases compare. So actually, in terms of caseloads, they're probably heavier. Individual caseloads are probably heavier in Finland than in Denmark, even than they are in England or Wales. In Finland, it's been difficult to kind of explain how that's managed, but certainly supervisors, managers, the service just seems to be a bit kinder to people. I was told by a senior officer that they have metrics, so officers are expected to complete so many investigations at such a time, but actually they leave it to the frontline supervisors to manage. It's not something that people get beaten up over. In Denmark, they do it slightly different. So in Finland, some officers are carrying up to 200 cases, which seems crazy to me. In Denmark, if you were to break down the number of crime reports, per detective, you're probably still, talking about 100 cases per detective. But actually, there's a role called a coordinator who manages the risk on behalf of the organization. So as a detective, you will only ever have 5 or 6 cases to investigate. And as you resolve those cases, you be kind of drip fed, you'll be given more cases. So there are hundreds of cases on the shelf. I'm not saying it's an ideal scenario, but it does mean that people are not sitting there thinking, that they're overburdened with so many cases personally, and that kind of commensurate problem for their well-being and the stress of that. So the stress, if you like, is carried by the coordinator for the service. So I think that is different, and much more. I'm old enough. I remember that a lot of the training was done in the workplace. I mean, ideally, you need, as a young cop, I would say, and as a young cop as I was, I felt I needed more formal training than I got. So I'm not saying we go back to a situation. We don't go back to the 70s and 80s. That's not an option. But I think that what I see certainly in those countries is that there's probably a bigger input on the practical side of policing in the training establishments. As a police university in Finland, a police college in Denmark, but then it is very much left to line managers to develop those staff in the workplace, and I think that is very different. Pay is an issue in both cases, and in both cases, Finland and Denmark, there is that pull of the response role, the patrol role, because it's seen as more exciting and it did not the paperwork involved, the kind of bureaucracy, if you like, and also it's slightly better paid because of antisocial hours and shift allowances. So I say a lot of similarities, some differences, a lot of similarities. Next slide, please. You just bring those up, yeah, thanks. So, I mean, the key takeaways for us are structural constraints. So, as I say, this is about the investigation as a kind of business, if you like. It's not about the individual failings. Heavy workloads hamper effectiveness. I mean, I know some of these are kind of obvious, but I think it's good to have the evidence to make the case, and we're not relying on anecdote. Because I think that, anecdotally, clearly if you have too much work, that's going to reduce your ability to conduct a thorough investigation. I think that's fairly obvious, and that comes up again and again in HMIC inspections. Workload and well-being are linked inextricably. I think that's well recognised, and then maybe what was less well recognised, but is maybe more now, that that link between ineffective investigation and trust and competence in the police is such a risk to the credibility of police and an investigation. Next slide. So these are the kind of things that have come up, because I think that, you know, and you might get that impression from my presentation today. You know, I think we've only been able to scratch the surface, and we really need to drill down now into some of the different elements of the work and the training and support that detectives are given. So those are, I won't read the list. I mean, you can read it for yourself, but I think those are areas that I think that we could and should spend more time thinking about. And certainly in the academic reference group that I talked about earlier, those are things that we talk about a lot, and and I'm promised that there will be some money forthcoming to enable those sort of some of those initiatives to be driven forward. And I'm also hoping that, although sadly we were unsuccessful in our bid to be a police centre of excellence, some of those centres of excellence are represented on that group too, and there are kind of other funding streams available to them. And you know, I hope that these are some of the things that we can focus on and try and make life a bit easier and a bit kind of happier for detectives going forward. Next slide, please. Okay, sorry. That's my presentation. As I say, I would add to that piece of work that I did on the recently on the policing as a kind of long-term career. But I think that's covered, I think, with a very broad brush, as I've said, the sort of things I wanted to talk about today.
Okay, so thanks very much, Adrian. That's very interesting. I was keen to hear about how the other countries, what the difference was with their investigations and ours, and you covered that. But did you go over with them sort of the ratio of being mentored or tutored? How do they work it? If we, you know, ideally for us it's a 1-to-1, but we know that it's more like a 1-to-3, 1-to-5.
Yeah. So they don't have any formal mentoring processes. So basically the sergeant, you know, or equivalent has the kind of training role as well as being obviously an experienced investigator carrying their own caseload. So it is very much like it used to be, I think, in the UK, and it works for them. And I think that was the point I was making earlier, that it works for them. I don't know. I'm a critic of evidence-based policing broadly, I have to say. You know, I don't think because it necessarily works there, it would work for us, because things are just so much more complex, and our populations are so much greater and more diverse, and numbers. I mean, I don't know what the ratio of officers to population is in those countries. I suspect it's greater than it is here. That's something I'll have to question. You know, so I'll have to make note for myself to kind of find that out. But it's very, very different environment. And I think also the way that the communities interact with the police is different. It's again, broad brush, you know, much less confrontational. I think they seem to have much more public support than seems to be the case these days in England and Wales. So it's a very different situation. It's kind of one of my, you know, major criticisms of evidence-based policing is that places are so different, you know. And what I can say is, just from writing an article on this, which will be out soon, I hope, in Policing and Society, you know, this is just not a problem just in Scandinavia and UK. There's too many cases, not enough experienced cops to investigate them. It's an issue in all of the developed world, you know, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Canada, the US, even Singapore. I found some literature about overstressed detectives. So there's a bigger piece of work around how do you manage demand and how do you prioritize resource, you know, when you have such a huge demand, because how do we know what's a priority today? Is it still going to be the priority tomorrow? You know, we live in a complex world, don't we? You know, things change all the time. So no easy answers. I'm sorry if I'm telling you a lot of what you know already. But as I say, I think the benefit now is we have some actual evidence to rely on,
Yes.
rather than anecdote.
Yeah. We did have Amanda, I think you put your hand up, so we'll just try and bring you back on so you can ask your question. Amanda?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, Amanda.
Adrian, hi. Thank you very much. It's quite a sort of sobering presentation, but all good, solid stuff. I'm just wondering, is there any sort of perception, the way there is here, that workload is increasing, but the funding has sort of eroded in Finland and Denmark? Because there's a lot fewer officers, there's a lot more work coming in the door, and people, you made a reference to sort of double hatting, but these days that's on a good day you only get to double hat, but many days you get to treble and more. Is that the same there? And is there any central appetite to address the fact that if you don't pay for a Rolls Royce, you're not going to get a Rolls Royce, you're just going to get a mini metro?
Yeah, very much the case. And take Finland, for example. When students go to the academy, they qualify and then they hope to find a job. So lots of the jobs are kind of tenured, if you like. So it's a full-time job, a career. But some of the posts are short-term contracts. And so what lots of the cops do is they get a short-term contract and then they kind of prove themselves and then get appointed, if you like. So recently, because of I won't call it austerity, cost cutting, they've stopped recruiting people on the short-term contracts. They laid off basically a lot of staff who were on short-term contracts, which left them just with the people. But it was the people on the short-term contracts who had recently joined and were working in the front line in both Finland and Denmark. You have to go to when you join as a cop, because nobody wants to be an investigator. Sweeping statement, but it's kind of close enough. They force people to go into investigating minor crimes for a year. So those people in minor crimes, lots of them don't want to be there in the first place. They're just looking to go to patrol. So when there's a problem with their contract, they just leave. If they think, well, there's no future for me here then. So it's worse than the question assumes, I think, that so it's really difficult. In Denmark, there's a move to civilianize in a way that we did 30 years ago, and that's causing problems for detectives who feel that their skill set or their skills are being undervalued. Well, why have I done everything I've done to develop myself as a detective? Just bring somebody in, take my job. I mean, it's not as straightforward as that, as I'm sure you can guess. But so they're under huge pressures, both of them, and the appointments are very senior appointments in the police services in both of those countries are hugely political. So if the government changes, then the senior appointments change. It's a very, very those are very difficult cases. I hope that answers your question.
See that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Amanda. I think we had Tim as well. Tim Hanson. We'll just bring you on, Tim.
Hello, Tim.
There we go. Okay, Tim.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Tim.
Brilliant. Afternoon as it is now, Doctor. Thank you very much for your presentation. During the research that you've done, have you seen much evidence of risk assessing what the detectives are carrying from either like a local management point of view or from a force point of view? Because with obviously you're aware, you're telling us everything we already know in this study. You just giving us the evidence that we already know is happening on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
But it seems like there's such a lack of understanding around the burnout and the mental health issues that are being placed on these detectives, and the performance and from the HMIC FRS as it is now is very public orientated, as it should be, but actually our concern as Federation is looking after the officers who are doing this. and doing all that work. And it just seems like there is an absolute complete lack of understanding or exact acknowledgement that where there's a risk to a traffic officer doing obviously a load of pursuits and fatigue and firearms and all the tests that go on there, but detectives, it's just like crack on and just here's another job. I know you're busy, but here's another job. And it just seems to be a complete bury the head in the sands moment. So that to me needs to be addressed as a health and safety concern for those detectives. And you've just got the research that proves that this is it. And the forces now should be aware that we are having this impact on detectives, and therefore, if we're not doing something about it, we're bordering into the realms of negligence.
Yeah. Next question. No, no, seriously, no. I think that yeah, you're spot on. I don't think that they see it in those terms, and maybe that's one of the reasons I've started to talk about this as a business risk, because I think that's maybe something some people who didn't understand can understand. I think this is a significant issue that there are so few detectives promoted to senior rank and to executive rank. People with so few people with detective experience, and I don't think that detective experience is valued in the way that other experience is, because people just have no concept of what detectives do.
Can I come in on that, Doctor? Because
yeah, of course.
I'm from Greater Manchester Police, obviously we're one of the biggest forces in the country.
Yeah.
And we have our chief officer group, so our ACCs and our DEPs, and they are very much uniforms, specialist operations backgrounds. But actually below that, all our branch commanders, the majority of them now have actually come through the detective background. What I've seen,
pleased to hear it.
But you would like to think that then that puts the detective portfolio higher on the agenda. But actually, what I'm seeing is it's just still a complete disregard from it. And it's a bit bizarre, because they know, I've had one chief superintendent, detective chief superintendent, say, well, throughout my whole career, I wasn't aware that I had to risk assess what my detectives were doing. And that's alarming, isn't it? That we've got the right people with, hopefully from a detective point of view, the right background of potential future leaders of police forces and in command positions, but actually it's still getting disregarded, perhaps because the culture is coming down from above, that the focus still is very much on uniform and operational policing as opposed to the detective world.
Yeah, that's disappointing to hear. I think, as I say, I sit on these different working groups, and I'm very conscious of the fact that we're talking to each other. It's detectives who are chairing those groups, talking to other detectives. And I don't know if enough of what we talk about kind of breaks out into that kind of, the wider kind of environment, so that people who can do something about it, chiefs and ACCs, get the messages clear enough. And so that is something I'm very conscious of. And it was somebody in one of those groups recently talked about how in their force they had no the person who made the statement was a chief superintendent themselves, and made the statement that nobody at their level or above had any CID background, and it did translate into a kind of lack of interest as well in CID, because so many things are coming at policing from so many directions all the time and changing. It's easy to lose sight sometimes of what's maybe staring you right in the face. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think that we need to be raising these issues every day. I've been speaking to people in the House of Lords recently and trying to get questions raised with the policing minister. But it's one of those things. It's almost such a difficult question to answer. People don't want to ask the question. They'd rather bury their head in the sand. I think is historically, I think certainly for the last 10 years, and I'm not sure now that that is the case. As I say, I'm seeing some stuff being written by senior officers now, which is talking about what they've done to try in their force to try and ameliorate the issues. But these are green shoots. I think we need to find some way of encouraging those, and I think the only way I know to do it is to bring forward evidence to support the case. It's the only way I know to do it.
So thank you very much. Thanks, Tim. I think we've got two people with some more questions before we break for lunch. So I think, is it Parveen?
Nice.
Oh, Jag, and then I think Parveen, isn't it? Yeah, Jag first, please.
Hi, James. Jag here from
Jag.
Leicestershire. In your study, did you have a look at salaries paid to detectives in Denmark and Finland compared to their uniform colleagues? And if so, did that have an impact on retention?
Yes, it did. And as I say, there is also that issue I talked about earlier, in that for new cops going into those services, they largely want to be patrol officers, because they want the excitement, what they perceive to be the excitement of the role, and there is that extra payment. And some people recognise that and are happy to take a lower pay for what they perceive to be a better work-life balance. But certainly it's a big drive, and it's why, as I say, particularly Finland, who are really rigorous around this, people who leave the training school, or leave the college, I should say, are posted. Their first posting is to a kind of minor crimes, or daily crimes, as they call it, unit, because otherwise people wouldn't volunteer, and people who are there are kind of desperate to get out, to get the excitement and the extra money. So it's a really big issue, but it seems to be one they're kind of settled with. It doesn't seem to be any drive or motivation to change that.
Okay, thanks, Jag. So last question, I think, is Parveen. Okay.
Good afternoon. Hi. In relation to some of the programs that have attracted more people into policing via the detective pathway, you would obviously then have more diversity within those specific
it's been
ranks.
a real plus.
Yeah. What has your study also encompassed, like the impact on people from those groups and kind of the attrition side of it, or the additional challenges that might be faced and counteracting them, or really the scope of your work? Has that also included that element of the diversity within policing that's coming in?
The studies I did in 2019 and 2022, so twice did this for the National Police Chiefs Council, show that the increased diversity in terms of skills and education, but not in terms of ethnicity or different social groups. So in that sense, and you can find my report on this, they were kind of largely unsuccessful, which was really disappointing to me, I have to say. But I mean, I don't know. I can't say, because I haven't gone back to that recently. So I don't know. Since 2022, maybe things have changed. I'd like to think they have. But there again, some of the things I've seen give me no confidence that's actually happened. Policing can be really perverse. When I did those reviews of fast track schemes, going back, as I say, those other two studies, I found that all the officers that were selected by forces had to go through the National Assessment Centre, and actually that assessment process screened out a lot of applicants from minority groups, which shocked me, because that was one of the stated aims of the program, was to deliver a more diverse workforce. But they kind of, you had two elements of the service working against each other. So this was our aim, but when you go to the National Assessment Centre, we could only take a certain, a set number, and unfortunately, a lot of people from those groups didn't kind of, reach the cutoff. But that was your aim. Your aim was to, so. As I say, that's the sort of thing that doesn't give me confidence sometimes, that things are working as well as they might do.
But I'm not surprised by that, because I've raised that. I'm not surprised by it.
I just thought it was kind of nuts, to be honest with you. But that was your aim, so how did you bring in a system that mitigated that? I've been researching, not doing policing for 49 years. It's kind of, Here we go again.
Question. Thank you. Thanks
for that. Thank you.
Right, so I think that brings this session to a close. Thanks very much again for your time, Adrian. Do really appreciate it. It's always very interesting in.
Yeah, thanks,
do your
Mel.
research.
I hope I haven't depressed too many people, but as somebody quite rightly said, I think I'm telling you what you know. Yeah, I get that completely.
It's good to have the evidence behind it, though.
Yeah, I think so. And I think this business of looking at things through the lens of a business risk might focus people's minds. Might focus the executives' minds a little more. I don't know. I hope so. I'm doing everything I can. As an ex-detective, it's something I'm hugely passionate about and committed to.
Yeah, we know. So thanks again for everything and your support, Adrian. And for everybody else, we'll see you back at 12:45 after lunch.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you had a good lunch break. So we'll get straight on to the next session. So this is going to be around wellbeing and demand, and we've got Sarah Jane Bray and ACC Martin Brunning. Hand over to you guys. Thanks very much.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, firstly, Mel, to you and your colleagues in what is an opportunity for us to speak to an audience that's close to my heart as a career detective. I'm the ACC from Cambridgeshire as the chair of the wellbeing element of the recruitment, retention and wellbeing of investigators. And I work very closely with
Sarah Jane, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Hi, I'm Sarah Jane. I'm Programme Manager for the Recruitment, Retention and Wellbeing of Investigator Programme on behalf of Chief Constable Jason Hogg.
This afternoon, folks, I can see a really well-attended audience. What we propose to do is walk you through the progress that the RRWI seeks to make precisely for this audience, the difference to what is a very pressured workplace, how we are navigating our way through some of the critical issues that all of the academic research and practical experience tells us are disablers and enablers to a workplace that we all aspire to work in, which is one where we're happy to come to, feel like we achieve something professionally when we get here, and try and maintain some semblance of order in our personal lives as well. It's challenging, but I hope by the end of our presentation, you'll understand the importance that you all play, and the Police Federation, and particularly the detective interest, which many of you will be here today because of your interest in the plight of detectives across the country. So, Sarah, in terms of slide management, have you got control? You have, brilliant. So in broad terms, folks, for those of you that haven't heard Sarah or I speak before, and we have been lucky to speak in this forum before, we focus in and around 4 key strands, essentially, or 3 key strands, but all leading to one big problem, and that being demand. We come into that later on. So we look at the challenges of recruitment into detective roles, why people don't remain in detective roles, and for those that do, how do we optimize their well-being? All of these are challenging. None of these are easy. And there is a significant group of people that sit behind the work that Sarah and I usually front, which is probably one of the best attended and contributed to MPCC portfolios of all of them, because this is such an important issue. And there are people within it who are prepared to be bold, sometimes a little bit provocative, to make a difference. And frankly, that's what's needed. But more importantly, in the practical, tactical, we identify best practice, we share it, we identify the latest research, and we'll talk in some detail around the interest that we have of academics across the country, which some of you might groan at, but trust me, there is a huge amount of benevolence and professionalism and occupational competence that will improve the work that we are seeking to achieve. Next slide, Sarah.
So, as many of you will know, that back in 2016, it was the HMIC FRS who kind of declared a national crisis around the shortage of PIP2 investigators, and they indicated there was 22% fewer PIP2 investigators than we needed. And to be honest, that figure was probably way off and probably generous to us, as our collation of PIP2 data was so very poor at that time. There were probably a lot less than that. We've done significant work through the recruitment, retention and wellbeing of investigator work and through Martin's group as well to really make a difference and make a dent on that. And I think we're averaging out at around 7% national vacancy level now when you include in trainees. However, you go and sit in any investigative team and say, oh, we've solved that crisis, people will quite rightly laugh in your face. And I remember very much at the time when this first landed on our desk in 2016, 2017, you know, there was real surprise by leaders nationally around why don't people want to be detectives anymore? It's what they make television programs out of. And of course they do. It's incredibly exciting, and it brings huge job satisfaction to be a key player in what lots of people join for, which is to make a difference and to lock up the bad people. But yes, they do make television programs out of it. But as you can see from each of these individuals here, very few people are happy about it. And the majority of these individuals have some sort of substance misuse or mental health issue in the portrayal of detectives. And so it's not quite the rosy picture that we think. And Martin, this is something we spend a lot of time talking about.
Yeah, and you know what? I look around the country and some investigation departments are not even called CIDs anymore. Everything that you see there is synonymous, well, perhaps with the exception of modern day Sherlock. They are iconic CID detectives, and some forces don't even refer to it as CID anymore. And that's something that I'm really passionate around, the identity of an investigator, which should bring some of that professional pride back into the workplace to enable some of you to at least smile once a day while you're at work.
But of course, when we delved into the challenges here about why people perhaps weren't stepping forward, we realised we'd have to be really honest about what those challenges are. And actually, as a service, we are the root cause of some of those challenges. If we were going to be really honest about how we recruited our detectives, the advert for such a recruitment drive would look something like this. Do you want to come along and do a very intensive national investigators exam that requires the kind of prep where you may as well do your sergeant's exam and get more money? Do you want to complete a complex and time-consuming accreditation process that will take you away from your family whilst also juggling a very, very busy day job whilst you try and do that? Do you want to experience higher levels of secondary trauma, burnout and PTSD compared to other colleagues within the service? And for the price for all of that is to actually have on average 10 fewer rest days and to be £1,200 a year worse off. It's not quite the clarion call, is it, that we expect for people to suddenly rush to the door to sign up.
So with that in mind, and I've had the privilege of working in this space now in wellbeing specifically for investigators for fast approaching 7 years. Forgive me, I talk very frankly because the benefit that 7 years of hard work in this space has given me is that this is about getting upstream to fix the problem. And with all due respect, have as many cake sales and welcome wellbeing dogs into your organisations as frequently as you like. That is not getting upstream. That is not managing demand. It is not making sure that critical things happen during the day to enable young, inexperienced, and certainly perhaps longer in the tooth and very experienced investigators find that balance that I talked about in the opening. So what we are trying to give you a sense of today, and there's a lot to cover but not a lot of time, is the national requirement for chief officer teams, the College of Policing, and you as lobbyists for a very big and very important staff association to be the voices in your force that achieves what's on the screen, the screen now. That is really understanding what it's going to take to get ahead of this problem as opposed to dealing with the fallout of the problem on a day-to-day basis. So what are we doing on your behalf to try and achieve that? So a quick whistle stop of 5 distinct work streams that, to put it mildly, have huge support nationally in terms of representation right across policing. Pretty much every force in the country is a contributor to this. But these 5 work streams are those which we now know offer the biggest opportunity or represent the biggest risk. So in broad terms, our academic reference group, probably the biggest pioneering success from the RRWI, and in its form, we have people with significant experience of wellbeing strategy, interest in law enforcement, experience of working with law enforcement, or at the front and leading edge of academic research around the types of pressures that particular roles within law enforcement and the way that will manifest in terms of impact and behaviour on the individuals. That group of people will give us the academic edge to make a business case, which is perhaps relevant to the last slide that we'll talk through when we get there. But we are looking to work towards minimum standards of wellbeing that we will ask chief officers to subscribe to on a bespoke basis according to risk. We've also realised that secondary investigators, so people that read documents in a Holmes room, or crime scene coordinators that go to scenes, or analysts who are looking at the data that's so abhorrent, reading it and visualising it, are just as at risk as those that are on the front line or dealing with people in custody as investigators. It does not discriminate in terms of your role, risk factors, particularly in high priority areas of policing. So we've found a way to focus in on that group of people who support investigators on a daily basis. Surprisingly, senior investigating officers are probably one of our most at-risk groups, comes with a range of factors, primarily seniority and perhaps an expectation that you just suck it up, however bad a day you're having. Forces need to wake up and smell the coffee around the risks that, by not listening to and observing the risks of their DCIs and upwards, is a melt pot of latent risk for the future. And if there are senior people on this call, please smell the coffee around this, because it is a real risk. But we'll talk you through some of the things that you can do locally. We also know that forces approach this problem of managing wellbeing with different data sets. There is no clear data strategy nationally that says if you take this, this, and this, put it together and you get an informed picture. What we are working towards is influencing at a national level the requirement for data sets to be made available nationally and holistically, so that actually we can start doing some benchmarking of what sickness levels in various ranks and roles looks like, so that we can start to understand a common picture. And this is all about interventions and helping you to then apply a methodology locally that works for your force. And within that, the training and interventions, which includes us influencing directly the College of Policing so that nobody goes through a professional development programme that is in a high-risk role that does not come with a bespoke wellbeing element or chapter to the continuous professional development of that particular specialism, because it's absolutely critical. You can't teach people how to investigate murder without helping them to understand what it's going to mean to them.
And so many of you will know that we also run an Investigator Wellbeing Week of Action every year, every November. I'm really grateful to many of you, including Ben and Mel, who come along and speak at that Week of Action and share latest progress and challenges, as well as interventions and opportunities. It's a well-attended week. The first time I ran it, I probably had about 100 odd people sign up. We had 6,500 sign-ups for the sessions last year. So we are really proud of how that's grown. And it's a great way for us to get information to you around not just progress of what we're doing nationally, but actually some tactical and practical advice for you as well. But throughout the week, I also run a mini survey and I ask the same questions every year. with a few additions as we learn and grow, but we are trying really hard to get a baseline as a group to understand not just how wellbeing is evolving for you, but also if there's an impact that we are having as a national group. So, and we'll take you through some of these key findings, because again, I think they're really powerful for you locally as well as what we use them for nationally. So we ask questions around support, which explores the kind of support that you get from your line manager, from the workforce at large, and the tools that you might have to manage your wellbeing locally. And we are seeing some kind of green shoots around this, where we are seeing some improvements, or at least things staying static. We saw a couple of years where things started to take a bit of a dive, to be honest, and started again to see things actually turn that corner. It's always really reassuring to see that actually people know how to support, how to access support for their mental health, but we know there's real challenges in you being able to access it, either through long waiting times, or actually a reluctance to engage support in work, through to perceptions of stigma. It's also really reassuring to see that the majority of people they can talk to confidentially about personal wellbeing matters, whether that's family members, whether that's peers, whether it's your GP, because we know that talking about it is so very important. And actually, it's a mixed picture on how people are seeing their forces support mental health. We'd expect to see this far higher, even though we are seeing it improve year on year. We have been talking about mental health now for some time as a service, easily for 10 years. And actually, we should be seeing far more than 33% of the service are investigators feeling that actually the force is making it a priority. We should be seeing far higher up that percentile. But again, Martin, we talk a lot about how leadership support is so pivotal in the wellbeing agenda.
Yeah, and being frank, the messaging that we get into the group is that there is a disparity across the forces around the receptiveness that either a layer of senior leaders or individuals at a senior level in the organisation are prepared to give to create the gateway for people to talk honestly and make the provision. This is really important stuff, folks, and if those things are not going to happen organically quickly enough in your force, I make a plea with you all to be that change. And if you've got the evidence base within your force around its responsiveness to mental health, perhaps from your own internal survey data, your Police Federation survey data, the organisation's voice is a loud one. And the role of a detective is, I put it in these terms: when detectives turn up to a serious incident, people breathe a sigh of relief when they see the smartly dressed professional. But whatever's going on inside the mind of that detective is probably a heady mix of really challenging, complex, trauma-based suite of investigations. And we are not invincible, folks. We simply are not invincible. But your voice collectively amongst your force and your peers is a strong one. And I urge you to be that change, to see that change within your force and make those demands of your chief officers, because some people just need that nudge. They need that evidence base, but they just need that human nudge to be the difference.
We also know that rest is a key issue, and it's something that is explored extensively by our academic reference group. And so we always ask questions around this. And actually, we are seeing some green shoots again in terms of people being able to switch off a little easier. When we first started running this survey, it was way down in the ones and the twos here in terms of scoring. We are seeing very small increases. But we do still see that there is a significant impact on work life and how that carries on at home, and also your ability to be able to take time away from the work due to demand, workloads, and other demands within the organisation that are often placed upon your shoulders. I think one of the other key areas that we ask is reward and recognition, and this is something that is so very important. And again, we tend to think of this around pay, but actually when we've explored this further with our investigators, yes, pay is key, but it's not the be all and end all. It's actually gratitude and the day-to-day gratitude. And again, Martin, you and I have plenty of conversations with our wellbeing group here, and indeed the retention group, about how maybe we're losing the art of reward and recognition in policing.
Yeah, and you know, I think that it's a mainstay of every police force that there'll be some form of formal commendation ceremony every year. Chiefs will present long service medals, they'll present their highest awards for bravery and commendation, but very few people will get that. A very small percentage of your force will be those recipients of the accolades. Actually, you know what? Most young, relatively inexperienced people in my workforce are not looking for glitz. They're not looking to put tunics on once a year. What they're looking for is appreciation throughout the year for the nuanced stuff that they do, and for there to be connectivity between their first and second line managers who can be bothered, who make the effort, and who go out of their way just to sit and talk about success, and to recognise a really good bit of work in the moment, not waiting 9 months for it to work its way through the commendation decision-making process. It's the day-to-day. And look, folks, at our generational diversity, because young people, and my force is a great example of a workforce mix that's probably got somewhere near 40% of its frontline investigative and reactive officers in their very early 20s. They are from the generation of instant gratification. Their behavior online in between going to jobs is instant gratification, looking at fast YouTube, TikTok, Insta pictures and videos. So fast gratification can be mirrored by the organisation's recognition of what makes and turns on a young 23-year-old detective and gets the best out of them, because you give them fast gratification too when somebody's done a good job. So dedicated wards, yeah, fine, that happens all the time, but does making time for somebody, does sharing their success internally, and does doing it in quick time actually happen on a daily basis? It's a challenge for you. We know it works.
And of course, the other key thing that comes out time and time again is the issue of demand. You know, when we are talking demand, we are talking not just, you've always talked to us about the workload, and you've always talked about the pressures from partnership agencies and file prep and resourcing and crime allocation. But a new one for us this year was actually bureaucracy. It came out last year, but came out even stronger this year. And actually, when you go into the kind of anecdotal and qualitative stuff, it's around the internal bureaucracy, often applied to improve investigative standards. So layers of scrutiny that we keep adding in to improve investigative standards, which are just getting in the way of people actually being able to investigate. And again, Martin, I think we're going to come on to demand in a little bit more detail later, because we've done quite a bit of work now to provide greater evidence on this to hand to the college for further review.
Yeah, no, I'll leave the audience with this challenge, actually. If, as is the case, crime is coming down, then why have we got more live crime than ever before? Why does it take longer to investigate? And why are our staff more burnt out and more susceptible to adverse consequences of more crime and longer processes? Because the complexity of it is ever increasing. So I'll ask you this question. When a system or a process changes in your force that's got some footprint and relevance to the investigation of a live crime, are you looking at that through the lens of well-being impact? Because we do lots of other impact assessments when we create change, but does anybody actually look at it through the bespoke lens of how is this going to affect the well-being of the workforce, because the system has just become more complex? But we'll park the broader demand conversation till slightly later in. So following on from the human impact from the week of action findings, keywords coming out every year we conduct this survey, and this is an important survey of people coming who are willing to absorb the messaging that the Week of Action affords them. So people are consistently telling us their workloads are too high, but what they're also saying is, and I don't get any support to manage that. Certainly in the wake of what is a step change in accountability through professional standards departments, and very, very acutely a very young supervisory layer, what I'm finding in my force, and I know others are, is that the interface between professional standards and frontline supervisors, and I am talking about DSs now, we find that they are not as bold as perhaps they once would be to see somebody having made a mistake and treating it as an opportunity to learn, and actually feel so on eggshells around the organisation's fear of public confidence crisis than actually interpreting these as conduct matters. So there is an inherent fear in some of our staff to actually fail because it will be seen either as a performance issue or a conduct issue, and actually not just a genuine mistake, and that can't be right. So look at your own force closely, because those factors significantly impact individuals' well-being in an investigative role. We know that it's full of people that want to provide a really good service and they feel that they can't, and that's almost a sense of shame for some individuals. And that presents a real business risk for you as DIs and DCIs, crime managers on this call, where you've got those pervading senses of doom and fear from people that A, fall over, and B, feel like they're just going to get in trouble for something that is actually a genuine mistake. So there is real risk here.
And of course, we ask, what do you think your organisation can do to improve investigator wellbeing? And I love this question because I often find, having done wellbeing work elsewhere in local forces, when you ask this question more broadly, there tends to be things around gyms and nutritional support and the kind of really tactical stuff. But, you know, I feel our investigators have a far greater understanding of well-being often than some other colleagues within the force. And I think that's really heartening, whether it's because of the extensive work that we've done to take this message into you, or whether it's just because you are so aware of how the work that you do impacts how you move through the world. And actually what we hear from you there is less around some of those tactical interventions and more around, I need help with my demand. I need you to be able to take responsibility for this at a local level within the organisation to help me manage my workload. I need you to be able to embed well-being into the kind of fabric of what we do and enable me to take time to take advantage of well-being interventions. They need leaders to listen. I need you to listen when I'm telling you that things are an issue, and I need to be heard and to feel that things that I am saying are being acted upon. And yes, of course, there are always facilities that can be improved. Lots of people working in some really grim stations and having very limited access to the basics, such as fresh water or, you know, hot food, sunlight in some cases. You know, we wouldn't treat our plants in the way that we treat some of our detectives, or indeed many of our workforces. I'm sure all of us at some point have worked in one of those hellhole stations. I know I've worked in more than a fair share of them. And also looking at CPD and how we embed well-being into that CPD, ensuring that from, you know, the very entry point of becoming an investigator or a PIP2 investigator, the well-being is threaded throughout all those CPD interventions right through until you move away from the role, as well as the broader CPD to enable you to feel confident to do the jobs that is expected of you, to know that you have the skills to do it.
So this was the feedback that we got from the specific audience participation question. What do you want us to do? Well, we'll continue to do all of this, but my ask of you all today is to recognise your capital value as being part of the biggest police staff association in England and Wales. So ask your forces through your chairs and your detective leads what your chief officers are doing about wellbeing in the investigative world, because until your leaders understand what the risks are, and even on a case-by-case basis, how people are falling by the wayside who join to do something they really love and believe in, there's no greater tragedy than when people do fall into the long grass and say, I can't do this anymore. So ask your forces, how do they scrutinise the acceptability of the wellbeing provision in the force? Because I can sit at any meeting nationally and hear headline great news stories of what forces are doing, but what is its value? Why does it need to be done in your force, or is it just something that somebody thinks is a good idea? So is it needs-based? Does it deal with an identified problem in your force? And therefore, is it relevant? So ask your force those questions, because I and Sarah, we have the privilege of speaking in what I hope to be influential forums like this. We won't change this on our own. Sarah and I talk sometimes well into the evening with frustration absolutely tinged around every element of our conversation, because we need traction. And I'm asking you guys to be that traction, to make sure your force recognises the risk, that it improves communication and well-being and mental health, if it's not already, as a daily conversation, and then provide your leadership layers with the tools and the skills. And we'll come on to some of the must-dos, must-haves shortly. An investment in your supervisory layers to give a young workforce and a young supervisory strata of your organisation the tools to do this right, based on what works. So one of the key work streams that I referred to earlier is our SIO work stream. And what we wanted to understand in and amongst a whole plethora of risks is just what burden are some of our SIOs carrying. So survey was conducted earlier on this year, 221 responses, and this is from PIP3 and PIP4 SIOs. So what does the headline data tell us? Well, it tells us there's an inconsistent way that forces around the country manage working excessive hours, salaried staff working excessive hours. There is no unified single approach. And at its worst, some SIOs are owed so much time for extended hours over the course of some pretty protracted periods, even when they ask their workforce for some time down to relax and kind of get that balance back, some of them are told that they can't take any more than 4 hours at a time. So they can't actually take a day off to neutralize their balance. This is 2025, folks. And everybody knows that the harder you work people and the less time you give them off, you're basically writing their future. So again, if there are leaders on this course where DIs are asking for a day off because they've got hundreds of hours in the bank, let them take a day off and make it happen. But 83% of forces within the response team, respondents, have no process for managing that. It's done on an ad hoc basis. And of course, we know demand is an issue, and we know that that's going to juxtapose up against people's freedom to take those days off. So of the 221 respondents, there are a grand total of nearly 45,000 hours beyond their contracted agreement owed. That's 221 people. You do the maths. But what it tells us is that there is a culture in forces that we just expect more and more. The lack of formal process gives rise to a leadership team who might not be bought into the impacts and the risks around mental health, never seeing the light on this, because they'll just expect more and more and more. And of course, the more time people give to under-resourced, heavily demand-led parts of the business, those people then become the prop that keep it all going. And actually, then there's no sensible business analysis of how many people, how many ranks, how much leadership does this business area actually need. So what this slide is telling us is there is a real risk from DI upwards all the way up to chief superintendent within our SIO portfolio. And if there are people on this call that are in a position to change that, change it, please, because some of these people won't have a lot of time left in them to have a full career, because we'll burn them out. we'll burn them out because we haven't actually got a framework to help them recover from it.
We are definitely seeing across the broader recruitment, retention and wellbeing portfolio, actually, for the first time, forces struggling to attract into the SIO role, which, you know, previously was always highly sought after, seen as fantastic CPD and, you know, a real opportunity to be part of this SIO cohort. And I've probably spoken to 3 forces in the last 3 months who are struggling to attract into the SIO role. And it's something that we've, you know, our SIO wellbeing group are absolutely fantastic and work really, really hard to identify what works for SIOs and to raise awareness of key issues like this. Because, of course, we know from regs that there is the kiss off around, you know, technically inspectors and above don't have that hours owed concept, but part of that agreement was that they wouldn't be asked to work those hours beyond. And, you know, you can see that the demand is there to do it. And we are just taking from so many people so many hours that they should be spending with those that they love, or doing the things that they love, or just sleeping. And of course, you know, it's a real challenge when those outside of the SIO role are looking in and thinking, I'm struggling already. If I take on that responsibility, that is going to break me, it's going to break my family, it's going to break my work-life balance. And so it is really critical. And we're having conversations at the moment with the SIO wellbeing group around how do we raise this using Martin's voice, raising this with National Police Wellbeing Service, raising this through the investigative portfolio and the MPCC committees. But a real ask of you, exactly as Martin has done there, to raise this in force and use this data if you need it. I've got a fuller report that I can share with you that will be going out as part of the SIO bulletin with a little bit more detail in it. But please, you are very welcome to this information to share it, to highlight the challenges that the people are seeing locally.
Thanks, Sarah. So very briefly, workplace triggers. This kind of headlines some of the broader conversations that we've already had. So we know this is kind of a recipe really for really bad wellbeing. So long hours, impact of shift working, the culture within the organisation, that if you are not supported in the upper tiers of senior leadership by a voice that is welcoming and one that is responsive to the real life issue of poor wellbeing in investigators, the demand issue, which we come on to next. Crucially, relationships that are suboptimal or negative between line manager and staff, deeply damaging for individuals in a high pressure environment where change is a constant in policing. Now we're staring down towards a horizon of police reform, national capability, significant financial challenges. Everybody will have seen the lobbying of the Commissioner of the Met for more money to the Chancellor just last week. If any of that is to be achieved, then it needs much more cash. But the reality is there ain't a lot of cash kicking about, therefore change is constant. And then if you happen to work in a paedophile online investigation team or a homicide team that's running short on detectives or a CID, you are in a high risk role. So all of those factors are just going to converge on you even before you look at your crime queue. And we also know that our agile workforce now will suffer in silence if they are not properly and effectively supervised. So those are things to look for in your organisation and can be impacted upon, and will lead you towards some innovations about how to do that later.
As Martin mentioned earlier, the academic reference group have been absolutely pivotal in our work here, because I feel, you know, over the last 7 years, we've really grown in our understanding of what actually changes well-being for the better. And, you know, what was once the quick fix stuff that we were seeking out and promoting, we are now taking a far harder line in terms of the things that we are constantly lobbying and pushing on. And it is backed heavily by this academic evidence from our colleagues across the UK and indeed internationally. What we did was a rapid research review of all the key investigator wellbeing research papers, of which there were thousands, and I can't say we read them all, but we took those that were heavily cited, that were constantly cross-referenced, and that were seen as the bedrock, added in the research from key players like opposite area, the VKPP in the college, the Policing Institute of the Eastern Region, who've changed their name recently and I can never remember what it is. All those other organisations and academic organisations who are heavily involved in investigator wellbeing, to look at what are the negative influences, what are the commonalities in all of their research for the negative influences and the positive influences, so that we can raise awareness of the things that are getting in our way for ensuring that our investigative workforce are well, whilst also signposting people to what are the positives here. And as you can see, there is very little, you know, in the positives. There is a quick fix around a nutritional course or a sleep webinar. It is fundamental organizational structures that need to change. And so we've spent a lot of time during all these kind of inputs to talk about the kind of leadership culture that needs to be created, how peer support is absolutely vital. We talk a lot through the week of action last year, and indeed have done so throughout this year, talking about how we advocate for each other, talking about how pivotal that demand management is, which Martin's going to come to in a moment, how rest is so key. We've talked reward and recognition. We've talked about the importance of prioritising that prevention. So all the things that we are talking about are all rooted in that academic evidence. It's not just because Martin and I get really angry on our soapboxes about what we think can improve well-being for people. This is scientifically backed by all those academic researchers as the key fundamentals to this work. And we've... Oh, sorry, go on, Martin.
Yeah, no, go on, carry on, Sarah.
No, I was just going to say, and we've distilled those even further down into 5 key game changers. And if we could wave a magic wand across policing and ensure that these were involved and heavily embedded into your wellbeing strategies and into the National Police Wellbeing Strategy, it would make a change not just for investigators. These would probably make a significant impact for everybody in policing and indeed everybody in the emergency services.
If anybody's going to do snip tool this slide, print it and stick it by your workstation, because if you do that as a leader, you have a fighting chance to really make a difference with your team. Absolutely that. And it is managing and prioritising that demand. And Martin will talk through the tiers of demand, where actually, you know, we've spent a long time thinking demand is for chief officers to worry about, when we all have a role to play in how demand is prioritised and managed for our teams, and how we fight to enable time away from the work, how we create our own boundaries around that as individuals. Lots of people from the SIO survey, you know, a huge number actually say in the last couple of years, I've really changed how I do this. I am far harder in the work that I turn down or say no to, that I cannot be involved in, that I am, you know, really on it on how I take my time away, but actually how we encourage our leaders to enable you to take that time too. And empowered and meaningful one-to-ones with supervisors who know how to signpost, ensuring that supervisors are aware of the wellbeing support available in force and externally and what makes a difference, so that they can help you seek that support. Showing that gratitude and the rewarding and recognising the work that our colleagues undertake, and ensuring that continuous professional development, that people have the capability and the confidence to do what we are asking of them on a day-to-day basis. Those are the 5, and as Martin says, you know, copy and paste them somewhere and post them wherever you can. Thanks, Sarah. So this slide's important because whichever way you try and assess the impact of demand, either separately as a issue for recruitment because the job's just got unattractive for people, people not wanting to stay in a role because it's become unattractive, or whilst they were there were unwell, the demand sits in the centre of that Venn diagram for a reason, because it is the one factor that tentacles its way into each of the 3 spheres of interest that that our subgroup seeks to support. I'm not going to go through all the small print, but just look at some of the reasons why people are unlikely to either come into, remain in, or stay well in the role of an investigator. So headlines: crime allocation is a consistent theme. It's either well done, badly done, unfairly done, but at no point have we got any sense of reassurance that nationally policing is on top of demand into an individual investigator. Moreover, the cases generally, it's pick-up day. I use that as a term for allocation day for a particular team of detectives. And it doesn't really matter what's already on the queue because it's allocation day to team B or team C. There is no arbitration around where that best fits into the CID. Actually, the model's creating the bottleneck, and we talk about that shortly. Then, of course, you've got the heady mix of yesteryear, where every detective in the CID that I first joined was somebody that's been there, seen it, done it, and got several T-shirts. Very few people have got the experience of that old profile. It is an evolving and inexperienced workforce, and therefore things take longer and puts more pressure on supervisory layers to help people navigate through. I'm absolutely certain that Force's operating models are the pivot upon which wellbeing succeeds or fails. Because if you build a model to create a CID around a shift pattern, around a number of people that has not anticipated the profile of crime that's coming in or the resourcing required to meet the demand to any level of operational effectiveness, then you just have a CID that's not necessarily going to meet that demand. What happens then? Everything takes longer, stuff starts backing up, people start getting frustrated, and wellbeing declines. It's a simple equation, it doesn't change. And then, of course, you get the internal relationship breakdown around who's getting that crime, skippers squabbling at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning when you've got a busy cell block. Who's going to deal with that one, and that one? Of course, everybody, first thing people start to talk about is, well, I've only got this member of staff, or I've only got 4. Very few people are saying, what's in the public interest here? What do we stop doing to deal with this pressing demand downstairs? Some people more advanced than others. And then, of course, there is that whole piece around leadership, which just accepts that it's too busy and they can't change anything. That's the bit that I'm appealing to you all to start to influence back in your force. Ask your leaders to start exercising these evidence-based local problems that you've got, that you can say, this isn't working for us, into your business planning cycles, so that your leadership teams understand what it is that's going on in your investigation teams. So we've looked at some examples around the country, and I'm going to skip through this because I think our time is getting pressed. But in essence, different levels of complexity around managing demand. The most basic, which is understanding basic monitoring of crime coming in to your workloads. This has got to be a shared endeavour, folks. The temptation for one DS to look after their own team. This is a team sport, and it extends beyond one shift of a CID. It needs rethinking if you have those silos in your force. Then there's the tier 2 element, which is understanding critical issues of demand. So that's a middle level approach to understanding demand. Devon and Cornwall do that really well through these considerations. And then tier 3 is the strategic. This is the business planning bit. This is the bit that says, is our force set up? Do we have the right people? Are we using the data correctly? And what is our optimum operating model in those critical, influential information sources? So there's something for you to think about there. So we end on these key questions, and they're to some extent rhetorical because we don't have the time to discuss them fully. What I can say is I would ask you to individually dwell on this. So what could you do in your force to understand investigative demand and the impact on its people? We will help you with this because I think this is centered around key data sets that all forces could call into to get a holistic picture. How do you understand investigator wellbeing data? Again, do you have a data strategy? How much do you set aside for wellbeing in your chief financial officer's budget allocation for the year? Is it even there? If so, what are you going to spend it on? If you do spend it on that, do you understand that that's needs-based? And then finally, how do we challenge the wellbeing narrative to focus on organizational barriers and mitigate business risk? And I finish on this point. Everything we've just talked about is a risk to business. If you spoke to a business person with shareholders and presented this proposition, action would be taken. So Your action and our help to enable you to action is to provide you with the information, the steer, the guidance, the interventions, the innovation, the academic research. We will provide that for you. We will provide it to chief officers, but it all converges on this. As a business risk, how do you put the mitigations in place? And we can support you with that in the longer term.
And I think that's pretty much it for us. We've included some of the national support for local issues, as we do with everything that we share. This is, I think you've got the presentation to share afterwards, so please explore these resources as much as you can. Our email details are at the end of this as well. If you want to be involved in any of this work, or you want to support in any way, or you want to ask any questions after the session, then please don't hesitate to get in touch with Martin and I. We're always very happy to help. And I think that's it from us.
As always, thank you, both of you, for a fantastic and really interesting talk on the challenges that all our colleagues are facing nationally. I think picking up on some of the points you talked around the SIOs, I think it links in really closely with a lot of the work that the Secretary's office and myself have been trying to push around inspecting hours, the need to change regulations around it, because in the world from 1994 is very different today, and the expectations on those in the inspecting ranks is very different. So I think that links in really, and again, and thinking back to Adrian's presentation earlier today around the demands on detectives, I think there's some good academic work and some good stuff that we can all push forward to try and change that narrative around. As you say, Martin, the expectation is that you will work, you will do it, and actually having a day off, you get almost made to feel that you're a burden for asking for a day off because someone's not doing that job for the day. And I think that's that change in culture we've got to do. We are up against the clock, but so would ask if anyone's got any questions, if you want to email them in and we'll pass them on to Martin and Sarah. But there was just a question that came up earlier that I think is worth reiterating that Tim made from GMP, and I think it's a good one to pose to you, Martin, is that risk assessments. Obviously, forces are really good at having loads and loads of generic risk assessments. Are you aware from the work you've been doing, and obviously now as a chief officer, is there an understanding amongst your fellow chief officers nationally that actually there is a very real threat and risk to the organisations from the pressures on detectives, and are people actually considering looking at risk assessments in a little bit more detail rather than just have a generic investigations one?
Yeah, it's not consistent is the truth. I was on a cohort when I undertook the executive leadership program, and I found actually some really informed chief supers or temporary ACCs going through the process, and it was heartening. So that there is the appetite, there is a broader understanding of the risks with the cohorts coming through now. But what's not consistent is the application and the way forces go about understanding what their risk is locally. Some forces will look at a significant change program and specifically deal with the anticipated impact on wellbeing. Others will probably not consider it. So I think consistency is key, but at the time of change, it's also critical for the staff associations to step into that space. And if there is an absence of recognition of risk within the decision making of that change program, that's the provocative role that you can play to be that change, to get that consistency through these types of forums. But there is a long way to go. I'll put it in those terms. But Sarah is also talking to forces as well, and I'd welcome if she's got anything to add on that.
No, I was just going to say it's exactly as Martin's articulated there. And I think it's something that we're also pushing with conversations with the National Police Wellbeing Service as well, because there's a role there to play in terms of, we're really conscious that we're talking about wellbeing in a very strategic space now. And to have that replicated across all those strategic stakeholders is really key to kind of create that influence on local chiefs. And how we do that is, as we've done today, is consistently passing on the same message, banging the same drum over and over again, and being really clear in actually, if there's money in this, And if you're spending it, spend it wisely, but spending, with that risk-based mindset is where it's at if you want to see change for what you're investing.
Thank you both again for the fantastic work you do to support all our detective colleagues. And as you know, if Mel and I can help in any way, do let us know. And I'm sure we'd be happy to support your week of action again this year.
Brilliant news.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, it brings us to the conclusion of today's event. Thank you all for taking the time to dial in. We had, obviously, there's lots of people I'm sure that haven't been able to dial in today that registered, so we will make the the video and slides available, with the exception of obviously Rob's one for operational security reasons. Please do take the time before you all dial off to click the QR code. We do want your feedback. We do this for you. We recognise that CPD across forces is really hit and miss. It is, and it is considered an abstraction rather than an investment. So we try and put these on. We want to have sessions that you want to engage with, that you're interested in. We can find people to speak. It is not a problem. So give us your feedback, give us your topics you'd like to see. We are committed, Mel and I, to doing the webinar, the one-off webinars every year, and then this bit for more of a fuller day. So if you don't give us your feedback, it will be just left up to us to decide what we think you might want to see, and we'd much rather do and find people to speak that you're genuinely interested to fill the gaps of knowledge or areas of business that you're dealing with in your day-to-day jobs. So thank you very much for dialing in. Just pass the mail to...
Yeah, thank you. I just want to put on record thanks to all of our speakers today. I think, I hope you all agree with me that I think it's been a really good day, some really good sessions. So just going over with Kath with the loan sharks, and we're definitely going to be linking back in with Kath, whether we do some kind of wiser webinar, incorporating neighbourhood teams, etc. I think, and certainly to share sort of socials with her and pushing out all of that work, etc. I think Adrian was really beneficial to give us that evidence behind what we already know around demand on detectives. It's really refreshing to hear an ACC like Martin talking the way that he does. It'd be great if others up and down England and Wales did the same and had shared those same sort of thoughts. And as he said, really get into your force and ask those difficult questions about what they're doing. And I think, Rob, to hear from the NCA, we haven't heard from the NCA for quite some time now, and it's great to get one of their investigations shared and the sort of level that they're working at, etc. So thanks again to everybody. Big thanks again to Quick Mortgages, of our sponsors, for the entire detective events and webinars this year. We've got another webinar in September,
Yes.
And then another one planned in November as well. And I think we're just still sorting out the topic for November. So any ideas, do let us know. We can get that organised. And as Ben said, we do really want your feedback. So there's the link in the chat and also the QR code on screen. It's very, very short survey. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate your comment. And we will be online at our Teams meeting for the forum on the 15th of July. Those of you that are already on the forum, you should have the link, but I will be sending it out again. Happy for you to share it with your colleagues if you think they're able to make it and it'll be beneficial. So that's it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Claire.